West Texas Eyes. A Wild Western Action Adventure. Chapter 1. The buzzards were the only things moving in the entire Llano Estacado, and they weren't in a hurry. Eldridge Sample watched them from a mile out. They circled in a slow, lazy spiral, black flakes of ash rising on a thermal that smelled of heated rock and dead things. There were 5 of them. That meant a big meal, or a meal spread out. "Trouble," Eldridge said to the bay horse. The horse didn't answer. It just plodded forward, its hooves crunching on the caliche crust that covered the high plains like a bone-white scab. The bay was a good animal, sturdy, and not prone to spooking, the one he'd ridden out of Purgatory Creek after throwing a railroad baron off a train. It was used to the weight of the man and the Winchester scabbard under his leg. Eldridge adjusted his hat against the glare. The sun was a white hole in the sky, hammering the flat earth until it shimmered. There were no trees here, no shade. Just the endless flat table of the staked plains dropping off into the canyons of the Caprock somewhere to the east. He rode toward the birds. He didn't ride straight in. He cut a wide circle, checking the horizon. Nothing. Just scrub brush, prickly pear, and the heat waves dancing like ghosts. He approached the rim of a dry wash. The earth here was gashed open by flash floods that happened once a decade, leaving deep, jagged scars in the limestone. The smell hit him before he saw the source. It was sweet, heavy, and thick with flies. Eldridge pulled the bay up. He dismounted. He tied the reins to a mesquite bush that looked dead but held the leather tight. He pulled his Winchester. He walked to the edge of the wash and looked down. 6, Eldridge counted. They were scattered along the bottom of the arroyo, like rag dolls a child had thrown away in a tantrum. 6 men. They weren't moving. They weren't going to move again. The buzzards had landed. One was perched on the chest of a man in a red shirt, tearing at a button. It looked up at Eldridge, hissed, and flapped its wings, reluctant to leave the table. "Go on," Eldridge said. He picked up a rock and tossed it. The bird hopped away, ugly and awkward on the ground, joining its friends on the far bank. They sat there, hunch-shouldered, waiting for the interruption to pass. Eldridge holstered his rifle. He slid down the bank, his boots sliding in the loose gravel. He walked to the first man. He was young, maybe 20, with bad teeth and a hat that had rolled 10 feet away. He was lying on his face. The back of his duster was shredded. Eldridge knelt. He turned the body over. The front of the man was worse than the back. "Exit wounds," Eldridge said. "Big ones." He touched the hole in the man's chest. It was the size of a coffee cup. 45-70, Eldridge judged. Government iron. Soft lead that flattens when it hits. He looked up at the rim of the wash, the opposite side from where he had come. It was a perfect ridge. High ground. "Ambush," he said. He moved to the next body. An older man with a beard stiff with tobacco juice and blood. He had been hit 3 times. Once in the gut, twice in the chest. He had a pistol, halfway out of his holster. "Didn't clear it," Eldridge noted. He walked down the line. It was a massacre. 6 men, all armed, all hard-looking. They wore the dusters and low-slung holsters of men who made their living taking things that didn't belong to them. Bandits. Rustlers. Comancheros. The border didn't care what you called them. But they hadn't fought back. Eldridge looked at the ground. There were no brass casings in the wash. No spent shells from pistols. They rode in, Eldridge reconstructed. They thought they were safe. Maybe they stopped to smoke. Maybe they were just crossing. Then the sky fell on them. He looked at the ridge again. "Volley fire," Eldridge said. Timed. Precise. 6 men drop in 2 seconds. It wasn't a gang war. Gangs were messy. They shot wild. They missed. This was work. This was discipline. He checked the pockets of the bearded man. A pouch of Bull Durham. A clasp knife with a broken tip. 4 silver dollars. Eldridge pocketed the tobacco. He left the money. Money was heavy, and out here you couldn't eat silver. He moved to the saddlebags lying next to a dead roan horse. The horse had been shot too. Dropped right where it stood to keep it from running off with the goods. Eldridge unbuckled the leather flap. Beans. Dried beef. A tin of peaches. Lunch, Eldridge said. He took the food. He shoved it into his coat pockets. He found a box of .44 ammunition in another bag. He took that too. His Winchester was hungry. He walked to the man in the red shirt. The one the buzzard had liked. This one looked like the leader. He wore silver spurs and a vest with fancy stitching. He had been shot in the face. Eldridge checked the vest pockets. A watch. Gold with a heavy chain. It had an inscription on the back, "To Michael, from Mother, 1878. You aren't Michael," Eldridge said to the dead man. You took this off someone else. He put the watch back. He didn't want bad luck. He found a piece of paper in the man's inside pocket. It was a map. Crude, hand-drawn in pencil. It showed the Pecos, the Toya Creek, and a line heading north toward the Caprock. There was an X marked near a set of double peaks. Rendezvous, Eldridge guessed. Or a stash. He folded the map and put it in his own pocket. It might be useful. It might be nothing. He stood up. The heat was pressing down into the wash, baking the smell of blood into the air. The flies were getting brave, buzzing around his eyes. He looked at the carnage. You boys ran into something harder than you, Eldridge said. He looked at the ridge. He climbed up the far bank, scrambling over the limestone lip. He found the shooters' positions. They were easy to spot. The ground was disturbed where men had lain prone. The spacing was regular. 5 feet between each man. A skirmish line. He found the brass. He picked one up. It was long, heavy. .45 to 70 government. Stamped with the arsenal mark. Cavalry, Eldridge said. He looked at the tracks. Shod horses. McClellan saddles. He could tell by the way the gear had been set down in the dust while they waited. A patrol, Eldridge said. Waiting. Lying in the sun for hours. He dropped the casing. It didn't sit right. Cavalry patrols didn't usually execute bandits from ambush. They shouted halt. They tried to take prisoners for the hanging judge. They wanted a show. This wasn't a show. This was a cleaning. No prisoners, Eldridge said. No witnesses. He walked back down into the wash. The buzzards were watching him from the bank, shuffling their wings, hissing. I'm leaving, Eldridge told them. It's all yours. He didn't look for a shovel. The ground was hardpan caliche, like concrete. It would take a pick and a day of sweat to bury 6 men and a horse. And for what? They were bandits. They lived by the gun. They died in a ditch. The coyotes and the birds had to eat too. He walked back to the bay. The horse snorted, smelling the death on him. Eldridge patted its neck, calming it. Easy, he said. We aren't staying. He mounted up. He adjusted the saddlebags, now heavier with the stolen beans and peaches. He felt the Mexican coin in his pocket, Boone's badge. It clinked against the stolen cartridges. He looked back at the wash one last time. The buzzards were already dropping down, their shadows flickering over the dead men like dark flags. Whoever shot you, Eldridge said, didn't want to talk. He turned the bay west. He wasn't following the tracks of the killers. That was a good way to end up in a ditch yourself. He was just riding. drifting, looking for water, and a place to eat the peaches where the air didn't smell of copper. He rode away, a solitary figure moving across the vast white plain, leaving the dead to the business of being dead. Chapter 2. The patrol didn't ride in like the cavalry in a picture book. They rode in like a headache, a loud, jangling confusion of metal and thirsty men. Captain Hatcher sat his horse at the rim of the wash. He was a man who wore his uniform like it was a costume he had outgrown. The blue wool of his tunic was stained dark under the arms. The yellow stripe on his trousers faded to the color of old mustard. He held a flask in one hand and his reins in the other, swaying slightly in the saddle as the heat hammered down on his neck. "Buzzards," Hatcher said. He wiped his mouth with the back of a glove that was stiff with grime. "God, I hate birds." "They're eating, Captain," a private said. He was a boy with a face full of pimples and a breath that smelled of corn whiskey. "Something big down there." "I can see that, Private. I'm drunk, not blind." Hatcher capped the flask. He shoved it into his saddlebag. He looked down into the arroyo. The buzzards were back on the bodies, ripping at the soft parts. They flapped their wings lazily as the shadow of the patrol fell over them. "Get down there," Hatcher ordered. "Clear the birds. See what we got." The patrol descended. There were 10 of them. They didn't ride in a file. They slid down the bank in a chaotic rush, horses bumping into each other, men cursing. They were loud. They were mean. And they were looking for something to break. Hatcher rode down last. He kept his horse at a walk, forcing the animal to pick its way through the loose shale. He wanted to look like an officer, even if his audience was just a pack of thugs and a few dead bandits. The soldiers reached the bottom. They kicked at the buzzards, shouting, swinging their hats. The birds hissed and hopped away, retreating to the far bank to wait for the second seating. "White men," the sergeant called out. He was a big man with a nose that had been broken so many times it looked like a potato. 6 of them. Shot to ribbons. Hatcher rode up to the first body. The man in the red shirt. "Bandits," Hatcher said. He looked at the fancy vest. He looked at the silver spurs. Or Comancheros. Trash either way. He looked up at the rim. He saw the layout instantly. "Ambush," Hatcher said. Someone set up on the high ground. Waited for them to settle. Then opened fire. "Must have been a whole platoon," the private said, looking at the holes in the red shirt. "Look at the size of that exit wound. That's a cannon." 45-70, Hatcher corrected. "Standard issue. Someone stole army rifles. Or someone with army rifles did this." He looked at his men. They were milling around the bodies, not checking for pulses, but checking for wallets. "Search him," Hatcher said. "Turn him out. If they were running guns or gold, I want to know about it." The soldiers didn't need to be told twice. They descended on the dead men like a second flock of vultures. They ripped open saddlebags. They turned pockets inside out. They pulled boots off dead feet to check for money hidden in the heels. "Empty," the sergeant said, disgusted. He threw a leather wallet into the dirt. "Cleaned out." "Nothing?" Hatcher asked. "Lint," the sergeant said. "And a little tobacco dust. Somebody beat us to it." Hatcher frowned. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the saddle horn. He looked at the bodies. They had been shot, dropped, and left. But someone had walked among them. Someone had taken the time to go through their pockets. "Who?" Hatcher asked the air. "Comanches take the horses. They take the clothes. They take the scalps. These men still have their hair." "Maybe they just wanted the money," the private suggested. "Bandits robbing bandits," Hatcher said. "It happens. But bandits usually bury their own dead if they win." Or they leave them where they fall and ride off. They don't shop. He looked around the wash. Speak, Hatcher yelled. A man separated himself from the group of soldiers. He hadn't been looting. He had been standing by the dead roan horse, staring at the ground. He was small, dark-skinned, dressed in a mix of cavalry cast-offs and buckskins. He wore a blue tunic with the sleeves cut off and moccasins that came to his knees. He didn't have a rank. He didn't have a name that anyone used. They just called him Speak because he never did. He looked up at Hatcher. His eyes were black, flat, and empty of anything resembling pity. What do you see? Hatcher asked. Speak didn't answer. He waved a hand. Come here. Hatcher rode over. The tracker pointed at the ground next to the dead horse. There were boot prints. So, Hatcher said, we're all wearing boots. Speak shook his head. He pointed to his own moccasin. Then he pointed to the sergeant's boot. Then he pointed to the print in the mud. He knelt. He traced the outline of the print with a long, dirty finger. It was a square toe, a riding heel. Then he pointed to the hoof print of the dead horse. The boot print was on top of the horse's leg. Fresh, Hatcher said. Someone stood here after the horse went down. Speak nodded. He moved. He walked a line through the carnage. He pointed to another print near the man in the red shirt. Then another near the bank. He stopped at the mesquite bush where Eldridge had tied the bay. Speak touched the branch. The bark was stripped where the rains had rubbed. He held up one finger. One man, Hatcher translated. One rider. Speak nodded. He pointed west. Hatcher looked west. The heat haze was shimmering, hiding the horizon. One man, Hatcher said. He rode in. He found them dead. Or he killed them himself. One man against 6, the sergeant scoffed. And he got 'em all without taking a scratch? Look at the ground, Captain. No brass. No blood trails leading away. He was good, Hatcher said. Or he was lucky. Or he was the one on the ridge. Hatcher looked up at the firing positions. Go check the rim, Hatcher ordered the sergeant. See what kind of shells he shucked. The sergeant scrambled up the bank. He came back down a minute later, sliding on his heels. Nothing, the sergeant said. Picked up his brass. Every casing. Hatcher smiled. It was a cold, tight stretching of his lips. Professional, Hatcher said. He kills 6 men. He picks up his brass. He comes down here and loots the bodies for, what? Beans? He didn't take the saddles. He didn't take the guns. Maybe he didn't need 'em, the private said. Everyone needs guns, Hatcher said. Unless he's already carrying enough iron to sink a boat. He looked at Speak. How long? Hatcher asked. Speak held up his hand. He tilted it, mimicking the angle of the sun. He pointed to the shadow of the bush. 2 hours, Hatcher said. Maybe 3. He looked at his men. They were hot. They were bored. They wanted to go back to the fort and drink. But Hatcher saw something else. He saw a loose end. A man riding alone across the staked plains with pockets full of stolen goods and a rifle that shot straight. A man who had seen the bodies. We're going after him, Hatcher said. Captain, the sergeant groaned. We're low on water. The horses are tired. We got patrol limits. I set the limits, Hatcher snapped. That man, he's a witness. Or he's the killer. Either way, he's got something that belongs to the law. What law? The sergeant muttered. We ain't seen a judge in 6 months. I am the law out here, Sergeant, Hatcher said. He tapped the bars on his shoulder. And I say we hunt. He turned his horse. Speak. Get on the sign. Don't lose him. Speak swung up onto his pony, a paint mustang that looked as mean as he was. He didn't use a saddle. He rode bareback, a rope halter for reins. He trotted out of the wash, his eyes glued to the ground. He found the trail of the bay horse instantly. He pointed west. Hatcher kicked his mount. Mount up. Hatcher roared at his men. Quit playing in the dirt. We got a rabbit to catch. The soldiers grumbled, but they mounted. They pulled their carbines from the scabbards. They checked their canteens. They rode out of the wash, leaving the 6 dead men for the buzzards. They didn't bury them. They didn't say a prayer. They just rode over the bodies, their horses' hooves adding one final insult to the dead. Hatcher rode at the front, right behind the tracker. He took another swig from his flask. The whiskey tasted like copper and heat. He watched the horizon. One man, Hatcher whispered. One man alone. He's got nowhere to go but the sunset. He spurred his horse. Chapter 3. The horizon wasn't a line. It was a shimmer of heat that blurred the earth and the sky into a single blinding sheet of tin. Eldridge Sample rode the bay horse through it. He kept the animal at a walk, conserving its strength. The horse was a good one, solid in the shoulder and calm in the head, but the Llano Estacado didn't care about bloodlines. It cared about water, and Eldridge didn't have much of that left. He watched the ground. He wasn't tracking anything specific, just reading the news. A jackrabbit had crossed here an hour ago. A rattlesnake had dragged its belly across the sand there. He looked up. To the south, a smudge appeared against the white sky. It wasn't a cloud. Clouds in West Texas were rare, and they didn't hang that low. It was dust. A column of it, rising straight up in the still air, thick and brown. Riders, Eldridge said. He pulled the bay up. He squinted, cutting the glare with the brim of his hat. The dust wasn't moving fast. It wasn't the frantic, wind-whipped cloud of a stampede or a posse running a man down. It was a steady, rhythmic plume. A procession. Too many for a patrol, Eldridge judged. Too organized for mustangs. He looked at the terrain. He was in the open, exposed like a nail head on a floorboard. To his right, a mile away, a ridge of caprock jutted up, a broken spine of limestone offering the only cover for 10 leagues. He turned the bay. He didn't gallop. He trotted, keeping the dust of his own passage low. He made for the ridge, guiding the horse into a deep wash that cut through the base of the rock. He dismounted. He tied the bay to a twist of mesquite root, deep in the shadow of the overhang. He loosened the cinch. Quiet, he told the horse. He put a hand on the animal's nose. Don't talk to strangers. The bay blew out a breath, shuffling its hooves, but it settled. Eldridge pulled his Winchester from the scabbard. He checked the load. He climbed. The rock was hot enough to blister skin. He crawled up the slope, moving on his elbows and knees, keeping his profile below the skyline. He reached the crest. He took off his hat and set it beside him. He peered over the rim. The dust cloud was closer now. It was maybe 2 miles out, moving parallel to the ridge. He waited. The heat pressed down on his back. A lizard scurried past his hand, pausing to pump its throat before vanishing into a crack. Shapes began to emerge from the brown haze. Horses. Lots of them. And riders. They weren't wearing blue coats. They weren't wearing cowboy hats. They were riding bareback or on blankets, their legs gripping the ribs of paint ponies and stolen thoroughbreds. Comanche, Eldridge whispered. It wasn't a hunting party. It was a war party. There were 30 of them. They rode in a loose column, 3 abreast. They didn't ride with the skittish energy of men looking for a fight. They rode with the heavy, sated posture of men who had already finished one. Eldridge rested the barrel of the rifle on a flat stone. He watched them pass. They were close enough now that he could see the paint on their faces, black stripes across the eyes, yellow zigzags on the chests of the leaders. They were stripped for war, wearing breechclouts and high moccasins. But it was what they carried that held Eldridge's eye. They were heavy. The ponies were laden with goods. Bolts of calico cloth were draped over the withers of the lead horses, the bright floral patterns looking strange and violent against the dusty hides. Copper kettles hung from rawhide thongs, clanking softly. One warrior wore a woman's bonnet, the ribbons tied under his chin, a grotesque mockery of Sunday best. And the horses. They were driving a remuda of loose stock ahead of them. 50 head. Good horses. Morgan mixes, big work horses with feathered fetlocks, and a few sleek quarter horses that belonged in a corral, not on the open plain. They hit a ranch, Eldridge said. A big one. He looked at the lances, carried by the outriders. They weren't just weapons. They were flagpoles. From the tip of the lead warrior's lance, a scalp hung. It was long, blonde hair, matted with dried blood, waving gently in the motion of the ride. Behind him, another warrior carried a lance with something darker, a man's scalp, gray and short. Eldridge felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. It was a familiar feeling, an old sickness from the war that never quite went away. He looked at the men. They were hard, brutal. There was nothing romantic about them. They were covered in dust and dried blood. One man had a bandage wrapped around his thigh, stained dark. Another was wiping a knife on his leggings. They were talking, not shouting war cries, but talking, laughing. They were comfortable. That was what stopped Eldridge. They were riding in the open, in the middle of the day, moving slow. They weren't looking over their shoulders. They weren't watching the back trail for the dust of a cavalry pursuit. They aren't running, Eldridge realized. They're parading. He shifted the rifle, tracking the leader. The leader was a big man, broad-shouldered, riding a massive roan stallion that looked like it had been stolen from a stud farm. He wore a vest made of blue cavalry wool, the sleeves cut off, the brass buttons flashing in the sun. He didn't look worried. He looked like a man who had just concluded a very profitable business transaction. Eldridge's finger hovered over the trigger. He could drop him. 300 yards. A long shot, but a makeable one. He could put a bullet in that blue vest and watch the big man tumble. But there were 29 others. If he fired, he died. They would swarm the ridge like angry wasps. They would find him, and they would do things to him that would make the buzzards turn away. Not today, Eldridge said. He let them pass. He watched the drag of the column. A few younger warriors were herding the loose horses, snapping quirts, keeping them in line. They looked bored. They rode past the ridge and kept going north, disappearing into the heat haze, leaving only the dust and the smell of horse sweat and iron. Eldridge waited. He waited until the dust cloud was a smudge on the horizon again. He scrambled down the slope. He grabbed the canteen from his saddle and drank. The water was warm, but it cut the dust in his throat. "Where did you come from?" Eldridge asked the empty air. He mounted the bay. He rode out of the wash. He picked up the trail of the war party. It was a highway of hoofprints, easy to read. He backtracked them. He rode south, following the wide swath of churned earth. He rode for an hour. The land began to change. The flat plain gave way to rolling hills, covered in grama grass. It was good grazing land. Cattle country. He crested a rise. Below him, spread out in a wide valley watered by a creek that ran green with willows, was a ranch. It wasn't a homestead. It was a kingdom. The main house was a sprawling affair of whitewashed adobe and timber, with a wide porch and a red tile roof. There were barns, stables, bunkhouses, and a network of corrals that held hundreds of cattle. A windmill turned lazily in the breeze. The Double V, Eldridge read the brand on a stray steer grazing near the trail. He looked at the house. He expected smoke. He expected flames licking at the roof beams. He expected bodies scattered in the yard, bloated and blackening in the sun. He expected the silence of a graveyard. He saw none of that. The house stood white and clean. Smoke drifted from the chimney, but it was the thin, blue smoke of a cooking fire, smelling of roasting meat. Men were moving in the corrals. Cowboys. They were working cattle, shouting, their ropes swinging. A buckboard was being loaded near the barn. It was peaceful. It was industrious. Eldridge frowned. He looked at the trail of the war party. It led straight to the ranch. They rode right up to the door, Eldridge said. The tracks went to the main gate. They milled around the yard. And then they turned and rode north. There were no shell casings in the dirt. No dead horses. No signs of a fight. The Comanches had ridden into the Double V, laden with scalps and stolen goods, and they had ridden out again without burning a shingle. That don't fit, Eldridge said. He checked his Winchester. He checked his Colt. He nudged the bay forward. He rode down the slope, heading for the main gate. He was looking for a massacre. He was prepared to find death. But what he was looking at was something worse. He was looking at a truce. He rode into the yard. A few of the cowboys looked up, their hands resting near their guns, but they didn't draw. They watched him with the wary, hard eyes of men who worked for a boss who didn't like visitors. Eldridge didn't stop at the bunkhouse. He rode straight to the main house. He saw a man sitting on the porch. The man was sitting in a wicker chair, his boots propped up on the railing. He was wearing a white linen suit that looked like it had never seen a speck of dust. He held a glass in his hand. Ice clinked against the crystal. Eldridge pulled the bay up. The horse blew out, tired from the heat. Eldridge looked at the man. He looked at the glass of lemonade. He looked at the trail of the war party that cut through the front yard like a scar. Afternoon, Eldridge said. The man in the white suit didn't stand up. He took a sip of his drink. He looked at Eldridge over the rim of the glass. You're trespassing, the man said. Chapter 4. The ice in the glass made a sound like small bones clicking together. Colonel Vance swirled the lemonade. He watched the condensation weep down the crystal, running over his fingers. He didn't look at the man on the bay horse. He looked at the dust settling on the hydrangeas, planted in half barrels along the porch rail. Trespass implies I climbed a fence, Eldridge Sample said. He sat easy in the saddle, his hands resting on the horn, his Winchester scabbard under his knee. I rode in on the main road. The gate was open. An open gate is an invitation to friends, Vance said. Not strangers with dust on their coats. Vance took a sip. He was a big man, heavy in the way a bull is heavy, solid muscle turning to fat under a layer of expensive linen. His white suit was immaculate, a glaring anomaly in a land composed of red dirt and brown scrub. His face was shaved clean, smelling of talc and bay rum, his mustache waxed into sharp points. He looked like he was sitting on a veranda in Savannah, not a porch in the middle of the Comancheria. I saw riders, Eldridge said. Leaving. I have a lot of riders, Vance said. It's a big ranch. The Double V covers 200,000 acres. We move beef. These weren't cowboys, Eldridge said. Unless your cowboys ride bareback and carry lances. Vance set the glass on the railing. He picked up a cigar from a silver tray. He bit the end off and spat it into the flower pot. Indians, Vance said. He struck a match. Comanches. Mimbre's band. They passed through. It's their land, historically speaking. I find it polite to let them cross. They were carrying loot, Eldridge said. Bolts of cloth, copper pots, scalps. Vance puffed the cigar to life. Blue smoke drifted across the porch. They trade. In Mexico. What they carry is their business. The scalps looked fresh. It's a hard country, Vance said. He looked at Eldridge then. His eyes were pale blue, the color of a winter sky, and completely flat. Men die. Women die. If the Comanches want to harvest hair, that's a problem for the army. Not for me. They rode right up to your door, Eldridge said. They didn't burn anything. They didn't take your stock. They rode out like they'd just finished Sunday dinner. I have an understanding with the people, Vance said. Respect. I don't bother them, they don't bother me. It's a business arrangement. Respect, Eldridge repeated. He looked at the ranch yard. It was too clean. The bunkhouse was whitewashed. The corrals were sturdy, made of railroad ties and heavy timber. The cattle in the pens were fat, sleek Herefords that looked like money on the hoof. There were men in the yard. Cowboys. But they weren't working cattle. They were watching. 6 of them stood by the barn. They wore guns tied low. They leaned against the wood, thumbs hooked in their belts, their eyes fixed on Eldridge. They didn't look like men who punched cows for $30 a month. They looked like men who were paid to keep the gate closed. You look like a man who asks a lot of questions, Vance said. For a drifter. I'm looking for a reason, Eldridge said. A reason for what? A reason why a war party rides past 500 head of prime beef to go raid a sodbuster 10 miles away. Vance smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who held 4 aces and knew you were bluffing with a pair of 2s. Maybe they prefer the sport, Vance said. Cows don't scream. The chill went down Eldridge's spine again. It wasn't the heat. It was the casual indifference. This man sat on his porch, drinking ice water while his neighbors were being peeled alive, and he called it an arrangement. Who are you? Vance asked. You got a name? Or do you just go by stranger? Sample, Eldridge said. Sample. Vance rolled the name around. Don't know it. You lie. Eldridge touched the pocket of his vest. The Mexican coin was there. Not anymore. Good, Vance said. Law implies you have authority. On the double V, I'm the authority. I'm the judge, the jury, and the bank. He picked up his glass again. He rattled the ice. Your horse looks thirsty, Mr. Sample. He is. There's a trough by the barn. Water him. Fill your canteens. Vance pointed with the cigar. Then ride out. West. Toward the Caprock. Don't stop. Don't camp on my land. And don't come back. That sounds like an order. It's a prescription, Vance said. For your health. Eldridge looked at the colonel. He looked at the white suit. He looked at the men by the barn. He wanted to pull the Colt. He wanted to wipe the smug look off Vance's face. But the math was bad. 6 guns by the barn. Probably more in the bunkhouse. And Vance. Vance wasn't afraid. A man who wasn't afraid of Comanches wasn't going to be afraid of one dusty rider. I'll take the water, Eldridge said. Generous of me, Vance said. He turned his attention back to the hydrangeas. Go on. The pump is manual. My boys don't pump water for charity cases. Eldridge turned the bay. He rode toward the barn. The 6 men watched him come. They didn't move out of the way. He had to steer the horse around them. He smelled them as he passed. Sweat. Tobacco. Gun oil. Nice horse, one of them said. A man with a scar running from his ear to his chin. He spit a stream of brown juice that landed an inch from the bay's hoof. Shame to ride it into the ground. Eldridge didn't answer. He dismounted at the trough. The water was clear, cool, pumped from deep underground. The double V had everything. Water, grass, protection. He let the bay drink. He kept his hand on the horse's neck, his eyes scanning the yard. He saw the tracks of the war party again. They went right past the bunkhouse. And he saw something else. Near the blacksmith shop, there was a pile of crates. Wooden crates stamped with black lettering. Winchester repeating arms. New Haven. They were empty. The lids were pried off, the straw packing scattered in the dirt. 10 crates. 10 rifles to a crate. 100 rifles, Eldridge whispered. The cowboys weren't carrying Winchesters. They had old Henrys or pistols. Vance wasn't arming his men. He was arming someone else. Hey, the scarred man yelled. You done drinking? Or are you waiting for an invitation to dinner? Eldridge tightened the cinch on his saddle. He looked at the crates one last time. I'm done, Eldridge said. He mounted up. He rode back past the house. Vance was still on the porch. He didn't look up. He was reading a newspaper that looked 3 weeks old. Eldridge rode to the gate. He passed under the high arch with the wrought iron VV brand. He turned west as ordered. He rode for a mile, putting the ranch behind him. The land rose up, turning into the breaks of the escarpment. He stopped in a cluster of scrub oak. He looked back. The double V was a white speck in the green valley. It looked peaceful. It looked civilized. But Eldridge knew better. He had seen the scalps on the lances. He had seen the empty crates. He's buying them, Eldridge said. He's paying the wolf to eat the neighbors. It wasn't just a truce. It was a partnership. He looked at the sky. A cloud of dust was rising to the east. Fast-moving. Company, Eldridge said. It wasn't the Comanches. They had gone north. This was something else. Shod horses. Riding in a column. Bluecoats. The cavalry, Eldridge said. Hatcher. They were heading for the ranch. They were following the tracks of the bandit killers. Or they were just coming for a visit. Eldridge watched them. They would reach the house in 20 minutes. They would talk to Vance. Vance would tell them about the drifter. The stranger with the dust on his coat and the hard eyes. He'll point the finger, Eldridge said, to cover his own dirt. He checked his back trail. He checked the sun. He was in the open. The soldiers had fresh horses. They had a tracker. Time to disappear, Eldridge told the bay. He turned the horse into the rough country, leaving the road, heading for the broken rocks where a horse could break a leg or a man could hide a trail. He wasn't investigating anymore. He was escaping. The double V wasn't a ranch. It was a fortress of lies. And Eldridge had just walked through the front door and seen the blueprints. West, he said. Keep going west. He kicked the bay into a trot, putting distance between himself and the conversation that was about to happen on Colonel Vance's porch. Chapter 5. The dust cloud Eldridge Sample had seen from the ridge materialized into a column of blue wool and sweating horses that smelled of old leather and bad whiskey. Captain Hatcher rode at the front. He didn't look like an officer on parade. He looked like a man who had been slow roasted over a mesquite fire for 3 days. His tunic was unbuttoned at the collar, his neck red and peeling. He slapped his hat against his thigh, knocking off a layer of alkali dust that hung in the still air of the ranch yard. Colonel Vance didn't stand up. He sat in his wicker chair on the porch of the double V, the glass of lemonade sweating in his hand. He watched the soldiers ride in, with the detached interest of a man watching a herd of cattle he didn't own. You're making a mess of my driveway, Captain, Vance said. Hatcher pulled his horse up. The animal blew out, dropping its head. Your driveway is dirt, Colonel, Hatcher said. His voice was a rasp. And I'm too thirsty to care about the landscaping. Hatcher swung down. He didn't dismount with grace. He slid off, his boots hitting the ground heavy. He walked to the porch steps. He looked at the lemonade. He looked at the ice floating in the glass. You going to offer a man a drink? Hatcher asked. Or do I have to confiscate it? The trough is by the barn, Vance said. The water is cold. The lemonade is for management. Hatcher stared at him. He wiped his mouth with the back of his glove. He turned to his sergeant. Water the horses, Hatcher ordered. And keep the men away from the bunkhouse. I don't want a fight with the colonel's hired guns today. The sergeant grunted and led the patrol toward the barn. The double V hands, leaning against the fence rails, watched them come. They didn't move to help. They just shifted their toothpicks and watched the soldiers with eyes that were hard and flat. Hatcher walked up the steps. The wood creaked under his spurs. He stood by the railing, looking out at the vast, empty spread of the ranch. We found something today, Hatcher said. About 10 miles east. In a wash. Did you? Vance took a sip. Gold. Bodies, Hatcher said. 6 of them. Shot to pieces. Vance didn't blink. He swirled the glass. It's a hard country, Captain. Men die. These men didn't just die. They were executed. 45-70. Government issue. Hatcher looked at Vance. Your brand of justice, Colonel. Efficient. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. One of them, the one in the red shirt, looked like that rustler you complained about last month. The one moving beef across the Pecos. Vance smiled. It was a small, cold movement of his lips. If he's dead, then I suppose my complaints were heard. By who? Hatcher asked. My patrol was in the south quadrant. We didn't shoot them. Maybe they shot each other. Thieves fall out. No, Hatcher said. Someone stood on the rim and dropped them. Someone who knows how to shoot. And then someone walked down there and went through their pockets. Hatcher leaned against the porch post. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his matted hair. Speak found tracks, Hatcher said. One rider. On a bay horse. Came from the wash. Headed this way. Vance went still. The ice in his glass stopped clinking. He thought about the man who had just ridden out. The stranger with the dust on his coat and the hard eyes. The man who had looked at the empty Winchester crates by the blacksmith shop. A bay horse, Vance said softly. That's right. You see him. Vance set the glass down on the railing. He picked up his cigar. He took his time lighting it, shielding the match flame with his hands. He puffed, the blue smoke drifting over Hatcher's shoulder. I saw him, Vance said. Hatcher straightened up. The fatigue seemed to drop off him. He was here. 20 minutes ago, Vance said. Rode right up to the porch. Arrogant. Didn't introduce himself. Just sat there and looked at me like I owed him money. What did he look like? Drifter, Vance said. Wore a canvas coat. Vest. Had a badge in his pocket. Or maybe he just carried himself like he used to wear one. Badge. Mexican coin, Vance said. Cut into a star. Looked like trash. Hatcher nodded. That fits. A vigilante. Or a bounty hunter who decided to keep the bounty. He asked questions, Vance said. About the Indians. Hatcher stiffened. He looked around the yard, checking to see if anyone was listening. He saw the Comanches. He saw them leave, Vance said. He saw the loot. He saw the scalps. He asked why I didn't shoot them. What did you tell him? I told him it was none of his business, Vance said. But he didn't look satisfied. He rode over to the barn, watered his horse. He looked at the crates. Hatcher cursed. The rifles. The empty rifles, Vance corrected. But a man like that, a man who shoots 6 rustlers from a ridge, he can do the arithmetic. He knows what 10 empty crates means when a war party just rode through. Hatcher paced the porch. He looked nervous. Corruption worked best in the dark, and suddenly the lights were being turned on. He's a loose end, Hatcher said. He's a knot, Vance said. And you need to cut it. Vance picked up the glass again. He held it out. He went west, Vance said. Toward the breaks. He's got a 20-minute head start on a tired horse. Your mounts are fresh. Hatcher looked at the glass. He took it. He drank the lemonade in one long swallow, the ice hitting his teeth. It was cold, sweet, and expensive. It tasted like a bribe. He killed 6 men, Hatcher said, wiping his mouth. That makes him a murderer. Federal jurisdiction. He killed 6 bandits, Vance said. Nobody cares about them. But if he talks, if he tells a marshal in El Paso about the crates or about the arrangement. He won't make El Paso, Hatcher said. He won't make the sunset. Hatcher set the glass down. He walked down the steps. Sergeant. Hatcher roared. Mount up. We got a trail. The soldiers groaned. They had just loosened their cinches. They were drinking from the trough, splashing water on their heads. Now. Hatcher yelled. Speak. Get on the sign. The mute tracker, Speak, was already moving. He was on his paint pony near the gate, looking at the ground where Eldridge had turned the bay. He pointed west. Hatcher swung into his saddle. He checked his revolver. He's armed, Vance called from the porch. Winchester. And he knows how to use it. So do we, Hatcher said. He spurred his horse. The patrol formed up, a ragged line of blue riding out of the ranch yard. They kicked up dust, obscuring the White House and the Green Valley. Vance watched them go. He picked up his cigar. He smoked, watching the soldiers disappear into the scrub. He wasn't worried about the drifter. Hatcher was a thug, but he had numbers. 10 guns against 1. The math was simple. Vance looked at the empty crates by the barn. Burn them, he said to the nearest ranch hand. Sir. The crates, Vance said. Burn them. Firewood. I don't like clutter in my yard. He sat back in his chair. He closed his eyes. He listened to the wind in the cottonwoods. It was a peaceful sound. The sound of business being done. Out in the scrub, Eldridge Sample watched the blue column emerge from the double V gate. He was a mile out, hidden in a fold of the land. He saw them turn. He saw the tracker point. They weren't riding a patrol pattern. They were riding a line. His line. He sold me, Eldridge said. He looked at the bay horse. It was rested, but it wasn't a racehorse. It couldn't outrun a cavalry troop on open ground. He looked west. The caprock was a wall of red stone 5 miles away. If he could reach the rocks, he had a chance. If they caught him on the flat. Run, Eldridge said. He kicked the bay. The horse leapt forward. Eldridge stayed low, hugging the neck. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He could feel the eyes of the tracker on his spine. Chapter 6. The bay horse was honest. It gave everything it had without asking why, digging its hooves into the caliche and pushing against the earth with a rhythm that was starting to falter. Eldridge Sample felt the change in the animal's stride through his knees. It wasn't a stumble, not yet. It was a heaviness, a delay in the recovery. The bay was running on heart, but its lungs were burning a fuel that was running low. Eldridge looked back. The dust cloud behind him was a solid wall, rolling west. At the base of it, 10 dark shapes moved with a mechanical, terrifying stamina. "They're gaining," Eldridge said. He didn't shout it. The wind whipped the words away before they cleared his lips. The cavalry mounts were fresh. They had spent the morning eating Colonel Vance's grain and drinking from his deep well. They were big American horses, bred for power and endurance, carrying men who rode with the arrogance of a pack that knows the rabbit has nowhere to go. Eldridge looked ahead. The Caprock Escarpment was a red line on the horizon, jagged and broken. It offered shade. It offered rocks. It offered a place where a man with a Winchester could make a stand and maybe turn the math around. But it was 3 miles away. "Too far," Eldridge whispered. He leaned low over the bay's neck. He could smell the sour sweat of the horse, the dust in its mane. "Come on," he urged. "Just a little more." The bay groaned, a low vibration in its chest, and stretched out. It picked up the pace, its hooves striking sparks from the flint. Behind him, a bugle sounded. It wasn't a call to charge. It was a taunt. A brassy, discordant note that cut through the heat haze. Captain Hatcher was playing with him. Eldridge checked his rifle. It was in the scabbard, bouncing against his leg. He couldn't shoot from the saddle at this speed. He'd just waste lead. He had to make the rocks. He checked the distance again. 2 miles. The ground was getting rougher. Scrub oak and mesquite clawed at the horse's legs. A dry wash cut across the path, 6 feet deep and 20 wide. The bay didn't hesitate. It gathered its haunches and launched. They hung in the air for a second, a suspended moment of silence, before hitting the far bank with a bone-jarring thud. The bay scrambled, dirt flying, and hauled itself up. Eldridge looked back. The lead rider, the tracker Speak, hit the wash. He was riding the paint pony bareback. He didn't jump. He slid down the bank and scrambled up the other side like a goat. He didn't lose a second. Hatcher and the soldiers followed, their big horses taking the jump in stride. They were closing. 500 yards. 400. Eldridge could see the individual soldiers now. He could see the yellow stripes on their legs. He could see the carbines resting on their thighs. They weren't shooting. Not yet. "They want to run me down," Eldridge realized. "They want to do it close." He spurred the bay. It was a cruel thing to do to a tired horse, but the alternative was a rope or a bullet in the back. The bay responded. It surged, fighting the exhaustion. 1 mile to the rocks. The terrain was rising now, sloping up toward the cliffs. The footing was loose shale. The bay slipped, caught itself, and kept running. Crack. The sound was small, distant. A bullet kicked up dust 10 feet to Eldridge's left. He didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the red wall ahead. Crack. Crack. They were finding the range. "Sergeant." Hatcher's voice drifted over the distance, thin but clear. "Drop the horse. Don't let him make the climb." Eldridge gritted his teeth. He weaved the bay, trying to spoil the aim. The soldiers pulled up. They stopped their horses. They weren't shooting from the saddle anymore. They were dismounting, kneeling, taking careful aim. Eldridge saw the glint of the barrels. "Sorry, boy," Eldridge whispered to the horse. He kicked his feet free of the stirrups. He grabbed the horn, ready to bail. A volley rang out. A ragged tear of sound. The air around him swarmed with lead. Zip, zip, zip. The bay screamed. It was a terrible, human sound. A high-pitched shriek of agony. The horse didn't stumble. It simply ceased to function. A .45 70 slug hit it in the hindquarters, shattering the hip. Another hit the ribs. The bay went down. It collapsed mid-stride, its back legs failing, It plowed into the shale, nose first, turning a somersault. Eldridge pushed off. He launched himself to the side, diving into the air. He hit the ground hard. He rolled, tucking his chin, the world spinning in a blur of blue sky and red dirt. He slammed into a mesquite bush. The thorns tore at his coat, but they stopped him. He lay there for a second, the wind knocked out of him, gasping for air that tasted of dust. He heard the horse. The bay was 10 yards away. It was thrashing, its legs kicking uselessly against the rocks. It was trying to stand, but its back end was dead weight. It raised its head, eyes rolling white, and screamed again. Eldridge scrambled to his knees. He reached for his Winchester. It was gone. The rifle was still in the scabbard, pinned under the 1,000 pounds of dying horse. He reached for his Colt. It was there, jammed into the holster tight. He yanked it free. He looked down the slope. The soldiers were mounting up. They were laughing. They had done their target practice, and now they were coming to collect the prize. "Good shooting, boys," Hatcher yelled. "That's how you stop a runner." Eldridge looked at the rocks. They were still half a mile away. Too far to run. Too far to crawl. He looked at the horse. The bay was suffering. It was breathing blood, pink foam bubbling from its nose. It looked at Eldridge. It knew him. It didn't understand why the running had stopped, or why the pain had started. Eldridge crawled over to it. "Easy," he whispered. "Easy." He put his hand on the horse's neck. The sweat was hot. The muscles were bunching, fighting a battle that was already lost. The soldiers were closing. 300 yards. A wall of blue coats and dust. Eldridge cocked the Colt. He put the muzzle against the bay's head, right behind the ear. "I owe you," Eldridge said. He pulled the trigger. The shot was lost in the thunder of the approaching hooves. The horse shuddered once and went still. The panic left its eyes. Eldridge stood up. He held the Colt in his hand. 5 rounds left. He looked at the oncoming patrol. 10 men. Carbines. Revolvers. Sabers. He could shoot. He could take 1, maybe 2 of them with him. He could put a bullet in Hatcher's gut and call it a day. But then he would die. And the men who killed the rancher, the men who were selling out the territory, they would keep riding. He lowered the hammer. He didn't drop the gun. He just held it at his side. The patrol swept over him. They didn't stop. They circled. They rode around him in a tight ring, cutting off his escape, hemming him in with horseflesh and dust. Speak, the tracker, pulled his paint pony up 10 feet away. He stared at Eldridge with eyes like black buttons. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just looked at the prey. Hatcher rode through the circle. The captain looked down. His face was flushed with heat and victory. He reined his horse in, forcing Eldridge to step back or get trampled. "You run good," Hatcher said. "For a drifter." Eldridge looked at him. He didn't say anything. He looked at the dead bay horse. "That was a waste of government ammunition," Hatcher said, nodding at the carcass. "But effective." "It was a good horse," Eldridge said. His voice was flat. "It was a dead horse the minute you rode out of that wash," Hatcher said. "Drop the gun." Eldridge looked at the Colt. He looked at the 10 carbines leveled at his chest. "I didn't kill those men," Eldridge said. "Drop it." Eldridge opened his hand. The Colt fell into the dust. "Kick it away." Eldridge kicked it. It slid across the shale, coming to rest near the tracker's pony. Hatcher smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed breaking things. "Get down," Hatcher said to his sergeant. "Bind him. Tight. I want him to feel the iron." The sergeant dismounted. He pulled a pair of heavy iron shackles from his saddlebag. He walked toward Eldridge, a length of chain swinging from his hand. Eldridge didn't fight. He held out his wrists. "You're making a mistake, Captain," Eldridge said. "We haven't captured a guilty man yet," Hatcher smirked, repeating the line he undoubtedly used on every poor soul he dragged back to the fort. Every single one of them says the same thing. They're innocent. The sergeant slapped the cuffs on. He cinched them tight, pinching the skin. "Check him," Hatcher ordered. "Take everything. If he's got a toothpick, I want it." The sergeant went through Eldridge's pockets. He took the knife. He took the tobacco. He took the Mexican coin star. He held the badge up. It flashed in the sun, dull and dented. "What's this?" the sergeant asked. "Toy Ranger?" Hatcher laughed. "Souvenir. Put it in the bag. It'll look good on my desk." Eldridge watched the badge disappear into the sergeant's saddlebag. He felt a cold, hard knot form in his chest. They had his horse. They had his gun. They had his name. But they didn't have him. Not really. "Mount up," Hatcher yelled. "We got a long ride to the fort. And I want to get there before the hanging rope rots." The sergeant grabbed the chain between Eldridge's wrists. He tied the other end to his saddle horn. "Walk," the sergeant said. Eldridge looked at the long trail back east. He looked at the dead horse. He started walking. Chapter 7. The chain didn't have any give. It was a straight line of iron links stretching from the saddle horn of the sergeant's horse to the manacles cutting into Eldridge Sample's wrists. Eldridge walked. He didn't look at the sergeant's back. He looked at the horse's hooves. Right, left, right, left. He matched the rhythm. If he stumbled, the chain snapped taut, jerking his shoulders in their sockets. If he fell, he dragged. He had learned that in the first mile. The sun was dropping, but it wasn't done with them yet. It pushed long purple shadows across the scrub, stretching the patrol out into a line of dark shapes moving through the heat haze. "Pick it up, prisoner?" the sergeant grunted, not looking back. He touched his spurs to the horse, quickening the pace just to see if the man on the end of the line could keep up. Eldridge lengthened his stride. His boots, he still had his boots though Hatcher had threatened to take them, were heavy with dust. His throat was a chimney full of soot. He hadn't had water since the wash. They rode for 2 hours. The terrain shifted from the broken rock of the chase back to the flat hardpan. "Camp," Hatcher yelled from the front of the column. He pointed to a cluster of mesquite and a dry creek bed that offered a windbreak. It wasn't a fort. It wasn't much of anything, just a place to stop moving. The sergeant reined in. Eldridge stopped, the chain going slack. He stood there, swaying slightly, the sweat drying cold on his skin. "Get him off the line," Hatcher ordered, swinging down from his horse. He tossed his reins to a private. "And tie him to the wagon wheel. I don't want him wandering off to file a complaint." The patrol had a supply wagon, a small, rattling buckboard that had trailed the main group. It was parked near the mesquite. The sergeant unlocked the chain from the saddle. He grabbed Eldridge by the shoulder and shoved him toward the wagon. "Move." Eldridge walked to the wagon. He sat down in the dirt, his back against the iron-rimmed wheel. The sergeant looped the chain around the spokes and padlocked it. "Comfortable?" the sergeant asked. He grinned, showing teeth stained with tobacco. "It beats walking," Eldridge said. His voice was a dry croak. "Don't get used to it. Tomorrow we do 20 miles. Running." The sergeant walked away toward the fire that was already being built. Eldridge leaned his head back against the spokes. He closed his eyes for a second, measuring his reserves. He was thirsty, bruised, and tired. But he wasn't broken. He watched the camp settle in. These weren't soldiers. Not really. They wore the blue wool, but they wore it like a disguise. Tunics were unbuttoned. Hats were tossed on the ground. There was no perimeter set, no latrine dug. Just men looking for a bottle and a fire. Hatcher sat on a crate near the fire. He had his flask out. He took a long pull, wiped his mouth, and looked at Speak. The mute tracker was sitting on his haunches a little ways off, sharpening a knife. He didn't look at the fire. He looked at the dark. "Good work today, Speak," Hatcher said. "You ran him right into the ground." Speak didn't answer. He just turned the knife over, the blade flashing orange in the firelight. "What about the loot?" a corporal asked. He was digging through a saddlebag, Eldridge's saddlebag. He pulled out the box of .44 40 shells. "This fits my Winchester." "Keep it," Hatcher said. "Consider it a bonus." He had beans, the corporal said, tossing a can to another man. "And peaches." "Peaches," Hatcher said. He laughed. "A man who eats peaches after killing 6 men. That's cold." "I didn't kill them," Eldridge said from the wheel. The conversation around the fire stopped. Hatcher stood up. He walked over to the wagon, his boots crunching in the gravel. He stood over Eldridge, blocking the light. "You're talking," Hatcher said. "I didn't give you permission to talk." "You took my horse," Eldridge said. "You took my gun. You didn't take my tongue." Hatcher crouched. He smelled of bad whiskey and old sweat. "You killed them," Hatcher said. "We saw the tracks. We saw the bodies. Professional work. Military work." "It was an ambush," Eldridge said. 45-70 slugs. Volley fire. "Is that right?" Hatcher smiled. "You know a lot about it." "I know what a government bullet does to a chest." Eldridge looked at Hatcher's holster. He looked at the carbines stacked carelessly against a log. "I know who carries them." Hatcher's smile got tight. "You accusing the U.S. Cavalry, Drifter?" "I'm accusing men who shoot bandits and don't bury them." Hatcher stood up. He kicked dirt into Eldridge's face. "They were trash," Hatcher said. He walked back to the fire, raising his voice so his men could hear. "Rustlers. Scum. They were competition." "Competition?" the corporal asked, opening the peaches with a bayonet. "For the range," Hatcher said. "Those boys, they were picking off strays. Messing with the colonel's inventory. We just cleaned up the pasture." "Inventory," Eldridge whispered. "That's right," Hatcher said. "We protect commerce. That's the job. And those 6 men? They were bad for business. So you executed them." "We engaged the enemy," Hatcher said. He took another drink. "And we won. Just like we won with you. You're the last one. The one who got away." "I wasn't with them." "Doesn't matter," Hatcher said. "You're here now. And you're going to hang for it. We'll write the report when we get to the fort. Bandit leader captured after lengthy pursuit. Confessed before execution." The soldiers laughed. They passed a bottle around. They dug into the stolen beans. Eldridge watched them. They were eating his food. They were drinking to his death. He looked at his wrists. The cuffs were tight, ratcheted down to the last notch. The chain was heavy, wrapped through the wheel spokes. He looked at the sentry. The sergeant had posted a guard, a young private who looked like he'd rather be sleeping. He was sitting on a rock 10 yards from the wagon, his carbine resting across his knees. He was staring at the fire, watching the others eat. "Hey," Eldridge said softly. The sentry looked over. "Shut up. I need water." "You get water when the captain says." "If I die of thirst," Eldridge said, "you have to carry me back. Dead weight is heavy." The sentry frowned. He thought about it. He looked at Hatcher, who was arguing with Speak about the weather. The sentry stood up. He walked to the water barrel on the side of the wagon. He dipped a ladle. He walked over to Eldridge. "One drink," the sentry said. "Then you shut your mouth." He held the ladle out. Eldridge leaned forward as far as the chain would allow. He drank. The water was warm, metallic, but it was wet. "Thanks," Eldridge said. "Don't thank me," the sentry said, walking back to his rock. "I just don't want to carry you." Eldridge settled back. He watched the camp. The drinking got heavier. The stories got louder. They talked about women in San Antonio. They talked about the price of beef. They didn't talk about duty or honor. They talked like men who had sold those things a long time ago. Hatcher eventually passed out. He didn't go to a tent. He just slid off his crate and curled up on the ground near the fire. Speak disappeared into the darkness, preferring the company of the coyotes. The fire burned down to coals. The soldiers rolled into their blankets. The sentry stayed on his rock. His head nodded. He jerked it up. He rubbed his eyes. Eldridge waited. He tested the chain. It was solid. He tested the cuffs. There was no play. He looked at his hands. They were swollen, the circulation cut off. He needed to move. He needed to be gone before dawn. Because when the sun came up, Hatcher would wake up with a hangover and a mean streak, and the walk to the fort would be a death march. Eldridge closed his eyes, feigning sleep. He listened to the sentry's breathing. It was slowing down. Even. Rhythmic. The night air cooled. The stars wheeled overhead. Eldridge opened his eyes. The sentry's chin was on his chest. The carbine was slipping in his grip. "Time to go," Eldridge whispered. Chapter 8. The sergeant didn't just tie the chain, he yanked it. Eldridge Sample stumbled, his boots catching on a ridge of limestone. He didn't fall, but it was close. He was walking in the dust of 10 horses, his lungs burning, his eyes stinging from the alkali cloud kicked up by the patrol. "Halt!" Captain Hatcher yelled. The column stopped. The dust settled on them like a second skin, gray and choking. They were in a flat stretch of scrub, miles from anywhere, exposed to the sun that was just starting to dip toward the western rim. There was no water here. No cover. Just heat and the panting of the horses. Hatcher turned his mount. He looked back at Eldridge. "Bring him here," Hatcher said. The sergeant spurred his horse, dragging Eldridge forward. Eldridge had to run to keep his feet, the chain snapping taut against his wrists. He stopped by Hatcher's stirrup. Hatcher looked down. He looked at the dust on Eldridge's coat. He looked at the sweat streaking the grime on his face. "You look tired, Drifter," Hatcher said. He uncorked his flask and took a drink. He didn't offer any. "I'm walking," Eldridge said. "You're riding. That makes a difference." "It makes you the prisoner," Hatcher said. "And it makes me the law." Hatcher nodded to the sergeant. "Get him off the line. He needs a lesson in military courtesy." The sergeant dismounted. 2 privates swung down from their saddles. They didn't look like soldiers. They looked like alley cats who had found a mouse with a broken leg. They dropped their reins and unslung their carbines. Eldridge saw it coming. He tensed, shifting his weight to his right foot. The sergeant unlocked the chain from the saddle horn. He didn't let go of the end. He whipped it. The iron links lashed across Eldridge's legs, wrapping around his calves. The sergeant pulled. Eldridge went down. He hit the hardpan with his shoulder, the impact jarring his teeth. Before he could roll, the first boot landed. It caught him in the ribs. A dull, heavy thud that drove the air out of him. "Stay down," a private yelled. Eldridge tried to push up. A rifle butt came down. It struck him between the shoulder blades, flattening him against the earth. It wasn't a fight. It was a beating. They circled him. They kicked him with the toes of their cavalry boots. They drove the steel butt plates of their Springfield carbines into his kidneys, his thighs, his back. They weren't trying to kill him. They were trying to soften him. They were working out the frustration of the heat, the bad water, and the long ride. Eldridge curled into a ball. He protected his head with his arms. He gritted his teeth, refusing to give them the sound they wanted. He took the hits. He let the pain become a distant, red noise. "Enough," Hatcher said. The kicking stopped. The soldiers stepped back, breathing hard, grinning. Eldridge lay in the dirt. He tasted blood. He tasted the copper of the earth. "Get him up," Hatcher ordered. The sergeant grabbed Eldridge by the collar of his coat. He hauled him to his knees, then to his feet. Eldridge swayed. The world tilted, then righted itself. He spat a mouthful of red dust and blood onto the sergeant's boot. The sergeant raised his hand to strike again. "I said enough," Hatcher barked. "I want him awake for the hanging." Hatcher dismounted. He walked over to Eldridge. He stood close, invading the space, smelling of whiskey and stale sweat. "You got a name?" Hatcher asked. "Sample," Eldridge rasped. "Eldridge Sample." "Well, Sample, you killed 6 men back there. Shot 'em down like dogs." "I found them dead," Eldridge said. "Just like you did." "Is that right?" Hatcher smiled. "You just happened to be riding by. Just happened to stop and go through their pockets. I was hungry. They didn't need the beans." "You killed them," Hatcher said, his voice hard. "You shot them from the ridge. Probably waited all day in the sun. Then you went down there and robbed the dead. That makes you a bushwhacker and a ghoul." "I didn't do it," Eldridge said. He looked Hatcher in the eye. "Check my rifle. It's under my horse. 44-40. Those men were killed with government lead. 45-70. Hatcher's smile didn't waver. He reached out and tapped the badge on Eldridge's vest, the Mexican coin star. "Ballistics don't matter out here, Sample. What matters is who's holding the rope." Hatcher ripped the badge off. The pin tore the fabric of the vest. Hatcher held the coin up to the sun. "Texas Ranger," Hatcher mocked. "Made of tin. You think this gives you the right to shoot up my territory? It gives me the right to ride through it without being mugged by the cavalry." Hatcher laughed. He tossed the badge to the sergeant. "Souvenir. Put it in the bag." "I'm telling you," Eldridge said. "I'm innocent." Hatcher leaned in. His eyes were bloodshot, glassy with drink and heat. "We haven't captured a guilty man yet," Hatcher smirked. "Every single one of them says the same thing. They're innocent. They're just passing through. They're just poor cowboys lost in the storm." Hatcher poked Eldridge in the chest. "Guilt is a decision I make, Sample. And I've decided." He turned to his men. "Strip him," Hatcher said. "I don't want him carrying anything but his skin." The sergeant moved in. He was rougher this time. He unbuckled Eldridge's gun belt, the empty one since the Colt was already gone. He tossed it into the supply wagon. He went through Eldridge's pockets. He found the beans. He found the tin of peaches. "Look at this," the sergeant said, holding up the can. "Peaches. The dead man's lunch." "Evidence," Hatcher said. "Keep it." The sergeant found the pouch of tobacco. He found the few silver dollars Eldridge had. He took it all. Then he found the map, the hand-drawn paper from the dead bandit's vest. He handed it to Hatcher. Hatcher unfolded it. He looked at the pencil lines. The X near the double peaks. Well, well, Hatcher said. Looks like our drifter had a destination. I found it, Eldridge said. On the man in the red shirt. Sure you did. Hatcher folded the map and put it in his tunic. This stays with me. Boots? The sergeant asked. You want his boots, Captain? They look like good leather. Hatcher looked at Eldridge's boots. They were scuffed, worn, but they were high-heeled riding boots. Good for stirrups. Bad for walking. Leave him, Hatcher said. For now. I want him to blister before we take him. Hatcher walked back to his horse. He mounted up. Put the irons on him, Hatcher said. Real ones. Hands and feet. I don't want him running again. The sergeant went to his saddlebags. He pulled out a set of heavy iron shackles. A bar linked the ankles, about 12 inches long. Just enough to shuffle. He kicked Eldridge's feet apart. He clamped the irons on. Clack, clack. He locked them. Then he pulled Eldridge's hands behind his back. He ratcheted the handcuffs tight, pinching the skin until Eldridge's fingers went numb. There, the sergeant said. Try running now. Eldridge stood in the dirt. He felt the weight of the iron. He felt the bruises on his back throbbing in time with his heart. He had nothing. No gun. No knife. No horse. No money. He looked at Hatcher. You're a thief, Captain, Eldridge said. And you're a killer. Hatcher looked down from his horse. He lit a cigar. I'm a survivor, Sample. Out here, that's all that counts. Hatcher pointed north. Wagon, Hatcher said. Tie him to the tailgate. If he falls, drag him. We make the fort in 2 days. The sergeant grabbed the chain, connecting the handcuffs. He dragged Eldridge to the back of the supply wagon. He looped the chain through the iron brace on the tailgate and padlocked it. Walk, the sergeant said. The wagon lurched forward. The wheels ground into the caliche. Eldridge stumbled. The ankle irons bit into his shins. He caught his balance. He forced his legs to move, shuffling to keep up with the mules. The dust rose up, choking him. The sun beat down on his head. He wasn't drifting anymore. He was livestock. But as he walked, head down, watching the iron rims of the wagon wheels turn, he didn't think about the pain. He thought about the map in Hatcher's pocket. He thought about the empty Winchester crates at the Double V. And he thought about the knife the cook was using to peel potatoes in the back of the wagon, just out of reach. Chapter 9. The fire was too big. It wasn't a cooking fire, carefully fed with mesquite roots to keep the smoke down and the heat concentrated. It was a bonfire. The soldiers had dragged a dead cedar log into the center of the camp and lit it up like they were trying to signal the moon. Flames licked 6 feet into the air, throwing sparks that died in the darkness above the canyon rim. Eldridge Sample sat in the dirt, his back pressed against the iron rim of the wagon wheel. The chain that connected his wrists was looped through the spokes and padlocked. It gave him about a foot of play, enough to shift his weight, not enough to stand. He watched the soldiers. There were no sentries posted on the perimeter. No pickets watching the horses. The discipline that had held them together during the chase had evaporated the moment the sun went down and the bottle came out. They were gambling. A blanket was spread near the fire, covered in coins and crumpled bills. Hit me, the corporal said. He was the one who had taken the peaches. He was sitting cross-legged, his tunic unbuttoned, a cigar clamped between his teeth. The sergeant dealt a card. He flipped it face up. A jack. Bust, the sergeant said. He swept the pile of silver dollars toward his side of the blanket. That's my pay, the corporal complained. That's the dead man's pay, the sergeant corrected. He picked up a silver dollar, one of the ones Eldridge had seen in the bandit's pocket in the wash. He flipped it. It flashed orange in the firelight. "You just been carrying it for him." Captain Hatcher wasn't playing. He was sitting on a crate of hardtack, his boots propped up on a log. He had the flask in his hand. He was staring at the fire, his eyes glassy and unfocused. He looked like a man trying to remember a song he used to know. Eldridge shifted his legs. The ankle irons clinked. The sound made Hatcher look over. "You still awake, Drifter?" Hatcher asked. His words were slurred, sliding into each other. "Hard to sleep," Eldridge said. "The chain is loud. It's supposed to be loud. Reminds you where you are." "I know where I am," Eldridge said. "I'm in a camp run by drunks." The sergeant laughed. He didn't look up from the cards. "He's got a mouth on him, Captain. You want me to shut it?" "Let him talk," Hatcher said. "He's bored. He knows he's dead tomorrow." Hatcher took a drink. He wiped his chin. "You see speak?" Hatcher asked the sergeant. "He went for a walk. Probably eating a lizard somewhere. That mute gives me the creeps." "He found the trail," Hatcher said. "He did his job." The corporal reshuffled the deck. He looked at Eldridge. "You really killed them 6 boys?" the corporal asked. "Or was you just picking the bones?" "I told you," Eldridge said. "I found them." "Well, whoever did it," the corporal said, dealing a hand, "did good work. That fella in the red shirt. I saw him in the scope. He didn't even know he was dead until he hit the ground." Eldridge went still. He leaned his head back against the spokes, closing his eyes to slits. "In the scope," Eldridge repeated softly. The corporal realized he'd said too much. He looked at Hatcher. Hatcher didn't seem to care. He waved the flask. "Tell him, Corporal. Tell the dead man how the army works." The corporal grinned. He relaxed. He picked up his cards. "We was on the ridge," the corporal said. "Waitin'. We been waitin' 2 days. Speak found their sign crossing the Pecos. Said they were moving heavy." "Moving what?" Eldridge asked. "Beef?" the corporal laughed. "No. Not this crew. These boys didn't herd cows. They herded opportunity." "They were rustlers," the sergeant said, cutting in. "But not the kind that steal from ranches. They were stealing from the root." "The root." "The colonel's root," the sergeant said. He threw a card down. "Double V beef moves north. It don't get taxed. It don't get hassled. That's the arrangement." "And those 6 men?" "They were poaching," the sergeant said. "They hit a double V drive last week. Took 50 head. Colonel Vance, he don't like poachers. He sent word to the fort." "And the fort sent you," Eldridge said. "We protect commerce," Hatcher mumbled from his crate. "It's in the charter." "You ambushed them," Eldridge said. "You lay on that ridge, and you executed them." "It was a battle," the corporal said. "A skirmish. They didn't fire a shot." "That's because we're better shots," the corporal said. He tapped his chest. "U.S. Cavalry. Precision marksmanship." He laughed again. He poured whiskey into a tin cup and drank it. "Besides," the corporal said, wiping his mouth, "they wasn't criminals." "Not really." "No. They were competition," the corporal said. The word hung in the smoky air. Competition. Eldridge looked at the soldiers. They weren't lawmen. They weren't even soldiers, not in the way he understood the word. They were hired guns wearing government wool. They were Vance's private army, paid for by the taxpayer and fueled by stolen whiskey. "So that's it," Eldridge said. "Vance owns the cows. And he owns the army." "Vance owns the grass," Hatcher said. He stood up, swaying. He walked over to the wagon. He looked down at Eldridge. "And out here, The grass is worth more than the flag. Hatcher leaned closer. His breath was a chemical fog. You think you're special, Sample? You think because you wore a badge once, you matter? Hatcher shook his head. You're just another obstacle. Like those 6 men in the wash. You got in the way of business. Killing isn't business, Eldridge said. It is when you get paid for it. Hatcher patted his pocket. It jingled. Vance pays in gold. Not scrip. Gold. Hatcher turned back to the fire. Deal me in, Sergeant. I feel lucky. Eldridge watched them. The picture was complete. The bandits in the wash weren't victims of a gang war. They were victims of a monopoly. Vance controlled the range. He used the Comanches to clear out the settlers, and he used the cavalry to clear out the competition. It was a neat, closed circle of blood and money. And Eldridge was the loose thread. He looked at his wrists. The swelling had gone down a little, or maybe he had just stopped feeling his hands. The metal cuffs were cold. The soldiers played on. They got louder. They argued over bets. They threw wood on the fire until the flames roared, pushing the shadows back. Eldridge tested the chain. It was wrapped twice around the spokes and padlocked. The padlock was heavy brass, U.S. Army issue. He couldn't pick it. Not without a pick. He looked at the wheel. The wagon was old. The wood of the spokes was dry, cracked from years of desert sun. He looked at the hub. The nut holding the wheel on was rusted. He looked at the soldiers. They weren't watching him. They were watching the cards. They were watching the bottle. One night, Eldridge whispered. He had one night. Tomorrow, they would drag him to the fort. They would write the report. They would hang him. And then, Hatcher would go back to Vance for another bag of gold. Eldridge leaned his head back. He didn't close his eyes. He watched the sentry, a private named Lewis who had drawn the short straw. Lewis was sitting on a rock 20 feet away, his carbine across his knees. He wasn't looking at Eldridge. He was looking at the game, wishing he was playing. His head bobbed. He jerked it up. He was tired. Sleep, Eldridge willed him. Just close your eyes. The fire crackled. The sergeant laughed at a joke the corporal told. The bottle went around again. Eldridge waited. He let his body go limp, feigning sleep. He let his breathing slow down. He was a statue in the dirt. A piece of luggage chained to a wheel. But under the coat, his muscles were coiled. He wasn't defeated. He was just waiting for the dealer to turn his back. The moon rose higher, washing out the stars. The camp settled into a drunken stupor. Eldridge watched and planned. Chapter 10. The sentry, Private Lewis, snored. It wasn't a loud snore, just a soft, wet rattle that meant he was deep in the whiskey and far away from the Llano Estacado. His chin rested on his chest, the carbine slipping until the muzzle lay in the dust. Eldridge Sample looked at his left hand. The cuff was tight. The iron bit into the wrist bone. There was no play, no slack to shimmy it over the heel of the hand. The sergeant had done his job. Only one way, Eldridge whispered. He positioned his thumb. He tucked it into his palm, squeezing his fingers over it. It wasn't enough. The knuckle was too wide. He braced his elbow against the wagon wheel. He took a breath. He pushed. He drove the thumb joint inward, forcing it against the natural hinge. Pain shot up his arm, hot and white. It felt like a nail being driven into the bone. He didn't stop. He pushed harder. Pop. The joint dislocated. The thumb folded in, lying flat and unnatural against the palm. Eldridge didn't gasp. He hissed, a sharp intake of air through clenched teeth. Sweat popped out on his forehead, instantly cold in the night air. He greased his hand with spit. He pulled. The iron cuff scraped over the skin. It caught on the folded knuckle. Eldridge gritted his teeth and yanked. Skin tore. Blood slicked the metal. The hand slid through. He sat there for a moment, cradling his left hand. It throbbed with a dull, sickening ache. He grabbed the thumb with his right hand and pulled it back into place. Snap. The joint relocated. The pain flared, then settled into a steady throb. Done, he said. He worked the right cuff. With one hand free, it was just a matter of leverage. He used the padlock keyhole. No, he didn't have a key. He used the slack in the chain to twist the cuff, using the wagon spoke as a fulcrum to snap the locking mechanism. No, that would make noise. Wait. The outline said he slipped the bonds. He slipped one. With one hand free, he could reach the padlock on the wheel. No, the sergeant had the key. He looked at the chain wrapped around the spokes. The padlock held the chain to itself. But now that his left hand was free of the cuff, the chain was just dangling from his right wrist. He was still wearing the right cuff, but he was no longer attached to the wagon. He wrapped the loose chain around his right arm to keep it from dragging. It clinked softly. He froze. Lewis shifted on his rock. He grunted, scratched his nose, and settled back into the stupor. Eldridge moved. He didn't stand up. He rolled onto his belly. He crawled. He moved away from the wagon, keeping to the shadows. He needed a weapon. The carbines were stacked by the fire, 20 feet away. Too far. The firelight was dying, but it was still bright enough to cast a shadow. If he went for the guns, he'd step on a sleeping soldier. He looked at the chuck wagon. The cook, a fat man named Cookie who smelled of lard, was sleeping under the rear axle. His bedroll was a tangled mess. Next to his head, stuck into a log, was a butcher knife. It was a heavy blade, carbon steel, stained black with use. It was close. 10 feet. Eldridge crawled. He moved inches at a time, testing the ground for twigs. He breathed through his mouth. He reached the log. The cook snorted, rolling over. His hand flopped out, landing inches from Eldridge's face. Eldridge waited. The cook settled. Eldridge reached out. He gripped the handle of the knife. He pulled it from the wood. It came free silently. He had a knife. He looked at the horses. They were picketed on a long line 50 yards out. To get to them, he'd have to cross open ground. And horses were noisy. A strange hand, the smell of blood, they would spook. They would whinny. If he woke the camp, he was dead. He was barefoot, hurt, and armed with a kitchen knife against 10 carbines. Walk, Eldridge decided. He backed away. He moved past the wagon, past the sleeping form of Captain Hatcher, past the tracker Speak, who was curled up like a dog in the dirt. He reached the edge of the mesquite. The desert opened up before him, black and empty. He stood up. His legs were stiff. His feet were bare, the soles tender on the rocks. He looked back at the camp one last time. He looked at Hatcher. Sleep tight, Captain, Eldridge whispered. I'll see you soon. He turned and walked into the dark. He didn't run. He moved with a steady, eating stride, putting distance between his skin and the rope. He ignored the stones cutting his feet. He ignored the throbbing in his hand. Chapter 11. The sun didn't rise in the canyon. It just turned the gray light into a white glare that hurt the eyes. Captain Hatcher woke up with a mouth full of sand and a head full of bad whiskey. He sat up, groaning, pushing the blanket off his legs. He rubbed his face, feeling the grit in his stubble. He looked at the fire. It was dead ash. He looked at the coffee pot. The cook, a fat man named Cookie who moved with the grace of a lame mule, was pouring water into it from a canteen. Coffee, Hatcher croaked. Comin', Captain, Cookie said. Just got the fire going. Hatcher stood up. He stretched, his back popping. He looked around the camp. The soldiers were stirring. The sergeant was pulling on his boots. The corporal was scratching his belly, yawning. Hatcher looked at the wagon. He saw the wheel. He saw the chain wrapped around the spokes. He saw the padlock still locked tight. He didn't see the prisoner. Hatcher blinked. He thought maybe the whiskey was playing tricks. He took a step closer. The chain was dangling from the hub. The cuffs were there, lying in the dirt. One was closed. The other was empty. Where is he? Hatcher said. His voice was low, dangerous. He looked for the sentry. Private Lewis. Lewis was sitting on his rock, his chin on his chest, his carbine resting across his knees. He was asleep. Deep asleep. Hatcher walked over to the wagon. He picked up the empty cuff. He looked at it. It was slick with blood. Fresh red blood that hadn't dried yet. He slipped it, Hatcher whispered. He looked at the ground. He saw the drag marks where Eldridge had crawled. He saw the boot prints leading away into the dark. The rage hit him. It wasn't a hot flare. It was a cold, constricting tightening of his chest. He had caught the man. He had shackled him. He had him ready for the rope. And now he was gone. Hatcher drew his revolver. He walked to Lewis. He didn't shout. He didn't wake him up. He put the muzzle of the Colt against the meat of Lewis' thigh. He pulled the trigger. Bang! Lewis screamed. He jerked awake, flailing, falling off the rock. He hit the ground, clutching his leg. The carbine clattered away. I'm shot. Lewis yelled. I'm shot. The camp erupted. Soldiers scrambled for their guns, thinking it was Comanches. Stand down. Hatcher roared. Nobody's shooting but me. The sergeant ran over, his suspenders hanging down. Captain? What happened? Hatcher pointed at Lewis, who was rolling in the dirt, sobbing. He fell asleep, Hatcher said. My leg. Lewis cried. You shot my leg. You're lucky I didn't shoot your head, Hatcher said. He holstered the gun. Look at the wagon. The sergeant looked. He saw the empty chain. His face went pale. He's gone, the sergeant said. He's gone, Hatcher mimicked. And he took his hands with him. Hatcher walked to the wagon wheel. He looked at the blood on the cuff. He broke his thumb, Hatcher said. Dislocated it. Pulled it through. That takes commitment. He looked at the cook. Cookie! Hatcher yelled. The cook dropped the coffee pot. Water splashed into the fire, hissing. Sir! Check your knives. Cookie ran to the chuck wagon. He checked the block of wood where he stuck his blades. The butcher knife, Cookie said. The big one. It's gone. Of course it is. Hatcher spat. He crawled right past you. While you were dreaming about pie. Hatcher walked back to Lewis. The private was holding his leg, blood seeping through his fingers. He looked up at Hatcher with eyes wide with terror. I just closed my eyes, Lewis gasped. Just for a second. A second is all it takes, Hatcher said. Sergeant. Bandage him up. Throw him in the wagon. He rides with the flour. He needs a doctor, Captain. He needs a court-martial, Hatcher said. If he dies on the way, save the paperwork. Hatcher turned. He looked at the edge of the camp. Speak was standing there. The mute tracker hadn't moved when the gun went off. He was leaning against a mesquite tree, paring his fingernails with a skinning knife. He looked bored. Speak, Hatcher said. The tracker looked up. He's running, Hatcher said. On foot. Barefoot. He's got a knife. He's got maybe 4 hours on us. Speak nodded. He put his knife away. He walked to the wagon. He knelt by the wheel. He touched the blood on the cuff. He touched the ground. He stood up. He walked to the edge of the brush. He found the spot where Eldridge had stood up. He looked at the ground. He held up 5 fingers. Then he closed his hand into a fist. 5 hours? Hatcher asked. Speak shook his head. He pointed to the blood. He pointed to the horizon. He's hurt, the sergeant translated. And he's moving fast. Speak walked to his paint pony. He swung up, riding bareback. He looked at Hatcher. He pointed west. Go, Hatcher said. Speak didn't wait. He kicked the pony. He rode out of the camp, his eyes locked on the ground, following the ghost trail of a man with no shoes. Hatcher turned to his men. Saddle up. Hatcher roared. We're moving. Captain, the corporal said. Breakfast ain't ready. The coffee. Hatcher kicked the coffee pot over. The water spilled into the dust, turning it to mud. You want breakfast? Hatcher yelled. Catch him. Catch the man who made you look like fools. He walked to his horse. He swung into the saddle. He looked at the empty spot by the wagon wheel. He thinks he's smart, Hatcher whispered. He thinks he's tough. He touched the flap of his holster. He's just meat, Hatcher said. And meat spoils in the heat. He spurred his horse, leading the patrol out of the canyon, leaving the blood and the spilled water behind. The hunt wasn't over. It had just gotten personal. Chapter 12. The ground in West Texas isn't made for bare skin. It's made of flint shards, limestone caliche that cuts like glass, and goat head thorns that can puncture a leather sole, let alone a calloused heel. Eldridge Sample stopped. He lifted his left foot. A mesquite thorn, 2 inches long and hard as iron, was embedded in the arch. It had gone deep, hitting the muscle. He didn't curse. Cursing took breath, and the air was already getting thin and hot as the sun climbed out of the canyon. He sat on a flat rock, balancing his weight. He pulled the butcher knife from his belt, the one he'd stolen from the sleeping cook. He used the tip of the blade to dig. He pried the thorn out. A bead of dark blood followed it. Boots, Eldridge said. Civilization is just a good pair of boots. He looked at his feet. They were already a mess. Swollen, cut, caked with red dust that was mixing with the blood to form a kind of primitive mortar. He had walked 5 miles since leaving the camp. 5 miles of watching every step, and the desert had still taken its toll. He looked back east. The horizon was empty. No dust cloud yet. But Hatcher wouldn't be riding in a column with bugles blowing. He would send the mute. Speak. Eldridge knew the type. Men who didn't talk usually spent a lot of time looking. Speak would find the spot where Eldridge left the wash. He would see the blood on the rocks. He would measure the stride and know that the quarry was limping. Can't outrun a horse, Eldridge said. Not on stumps. He stood up. He unbuttoned his canvas coat. He took it off. The air hit his sweat-soaked shirt, cooling him for a second. He took the shirt off, too. He stood in the sun, bare-chested, his ribs showing through skin that was turning the color of old saddle leather. He laid the shirt on the rock. It was good cotton, thick flannel. He used the knife. He cut the sleeves off. He slit the back panel into wide strips. He worked fast, the knife singing against the fabric. He sat back down. He wrapped his feet. He started with the toes, winding the flannel tight, layering it over the arch and the heel. He used the sleeves as the outer layer, tying them around his ankles with square knots. They weren't boots. They were ugly, bulky bundles of cloth that looked like bandages on a mummy. But they were padding. He put the coat back on. He buttoned it over his bare chest. The canvas was rough, scratching his skin, but it would keep the sun off. He stood up. He stamped his feet. The cloth muffled the impact. "Better," he said. He picked up the knife. He checked the horizon again. Still empty. But the feeling was there. The itch between his shoulder blades. The sense that something was moving behind him, low to the ground and hungry. Eldridge turned west. He didn't just walk. He moved with a purpose that had nothing to do with distance and everything to do with deception. The land here was a mix of hardpan and scrub. Open patches of baked clay, interspersed with islands of prickly pear and chala. Eldridge stayed on the hardpan. It didn't take a print like the sand did. But it still left sign, scuff marks, crushed pebbles, a disturbance in the dust that a man like Speak would read like a billboard. He stopped at a patch of sagebrush. He cut a branch with the knife. He tied the branch to his waist with a strip of the shirt he'd saved. He let it drag behind him. It swept the dust. It didn't erase his tracks, but it blurred them. It turned a distinct footprint into a vague smudge that the wind would finish off in an hour. "Confuse the eye," Eldridge whispered. He walked. The sun got higher. The heat built up, reflecting off the ground, turning the air into a shimmering oven. Eldridge kept to the shade of the larger rocks whenever he could. He moved from shadow to shadow, a ghost flitting through the furnace. He came to a ridge of limestone. It was a spine of rock running north to south. He climbed it. Rock was good. Rock didn't tell stories. He stepped carefully, placing his wrapped feet on the solid slabs, avoiding the loose gravel that would slide and leave a scar. He reached the top. He looked back. He saw it. Miles back, near the mouth of the canyon where the soldiers had camped, a single figure was moving. It wasn't a patrol. It was one rider. On a paint pony. Speak. The tracker was moving slow. He was leaning over the neck of his pony, watching the ground. He wasn't following the general direction. He was following the specific line. He stopped. He got off the pony. He knelt. He found the blood, Eldridge said. Speak stood up. He looked west. He looked right at the ridge where Eldridge lay flattened against the stone. Distance, 3 miles. Eldridge slid back below the skyline. He's good, Eldridge admitted. He checked the knife. It was a kitchen tool, meant for slicing beef, not fighting a man who hunted people for a living. But it was steel. He looked at the terrain ahead. A maze of arroyos and washes cut through the plain, leading toward the caprock. It was broken country. Dangerous country. A place where a man could hide, or a place where a man could get cornered. Eldridge moved. He didn't go straight. He cut back. He walked 100 yards south along the ridge, stepping only on the big stones. Then he dropped down into a gully. He walked backward for 50 paces, stepping in his own tracks, doubling the print. Then he leapt sideways, landing on a flat rock in the middle of a dry stream bed. He moved up the stream bed, stepping from stone to stone. It was a game of hopscotch played for life stakes. He sweated. The canvas coat was a sauna. His water was gone. The soldiers had taken his canteen. His throat felt like he had swallowed a handful of dry needles. He saw a barrel cactus. He stopped. He used the knife to slice off the top of the plant, careful of the hooked spines. He mashed the white pulp inside with the handle of the knife. He scooped out a handful of the wet mash and sucked on it. It was bitter, alkaline juice that tasted terrible, but it was wet. He chewed the pulp, spitting out the fiber. "Dinner," he said. He kept moving. He found a place where the wind had blown tumbleweeds into a pile against a cut bank. He walked past it. Then he stopped. He backtracked. He lifted the tumbleweeds with the knife. Underneath, the ground was soft sand. He stepped into the sand. He made a clear print. A boot print? No, a cloth print. A distinct, rounded impression of his wrapped foot. He stepped out. He let the tumbleweeds fall back, covering the print. "Let him find that," Eldridge said. "If he's looking that close, he deserves a prize." He moved on. The afternoon dragged. The sun began to slide down the sky, losing its white intensity and turning gold. The shadows stretched out, long and thin. Eldridge was tired. His legs ached. The improvised moccasins were holding up, but the rocks were bruising his soles through the flannel. Every step was a reminder that he was out of his element. A man on a horse owns the ground. A man on foot rents it by the inch. He reached a box canyon. Small, narrow, filled with boulders. He went in. He climbed the wall at the back end. It was a tough scramble, using his hands, jamming his toes into cracks. He hauled himself up to the rim. He lay down. He looked back down the canyon. He waited. 20 minutes later, Speak appeared. The tracker was on foot now, leading his pony. He was studying the ground at the mouth of the canyon. He stopped. He touched a rock where Eldridge's coat had brushed against the lichen. Speak looked into the canyon. He looked at the walls. He didn't go in. He stood there, still as a statue, reading the air. He knew. He knew that a box canyon was a trap for a rider, but a ladder for a climber. Speak turned. He mounted his pony. He rode around the side of the canyon, heading for the high ground, looking for the place where Eldridge had topped out. Eldridge watched him go. "He knows the mind," Eldridge whispered. "He's not tracking the feet anymore. He's tracking the intent." Eldridge stood up. He was exposed on the rim. He needed to vanish. He found a field of volcanic rock, jagged black stones that stretched for a mile. He walked into it. The rock was hard, unyielding. It left no prints. It held no scent. He moved fast now, hopping from slab to slab. He zigzagged. He circled. He created a knot of movement that had no beginning and no end. The sun touched the horizon. Eldridge stopped. He was in the middle of the lava field. He crouched behind a ridge of basalt. He looked back. The plain was empty. Speak had lost the line. For now. But the tracker wouldn't quit. He would circle the lava field until he found the exit point. He would pick up the trail on the other side. "Tomorrow," Eldridge said. He looked at his feet. The flannel was shredded, stained with blood and dirt. He unwrapped the left one. The skin was raw, blistered, but the cut from the thorn hadn't infected yet. He rewrapped it, tying the knot tighter. He had no water. He had no gun. He had a knife and a coat and a head start that was shrinking every hour. But he was alive. He looked at the moon rising pale in the east. "You want me," Eldridge said to the invisible tracker. "Come and find me." He stood up. He didn't rest. He turned west, moving into the twilight, a ghost shuffling through a graveyard of black rock, covering his tracks with nothing but the night. Chapter 13. The moon was a white skull, grinning down at a man who was walking dead. Eldridge Sample stopped. He didn't stop because he wanted to. He stopped because his legs refused the next order. He leaned against a spire of black basalt, the stone still warm from the day, and slid down until he was sitting in the dirt. He licked his lips. His tongue was a piece of dry leather. It scraped against the roof of his mouth, finding no moisture, just dust and the taste of his own decay. He looked west. The horizon was a flat, empty line. There was no water that way. Not for 20 miles. Maybe 30. In boots with a canteen, it was a hard walk. Barefoot, wrapped in bloody flannel, with veins pumping sludge, it was a suicide note. "You aren't going to make it," Eldridge whispered. The sound was a dry rustle, like wind in dead grass. He looked at his feet. The shirt bandages were shredded, dark with old blood and fresh seep. The rock had eaten the cotton. He looked back east. He couldn't see them, but he knew they were there. Hatcher. The tracker. The 10 men in blue coats, who had water in their canteens and coffee in their pot. They were camped somewhere on his back trail, resting their horses, waiting for the sun to come up so they could finish running him into the ground. "They have horses," Eldridge said. "They have water." He realized the math. He had been doing it wrong. He had been subtracting miles from the horizon, trying to reach a zero that kept moving away. He needed to change the equation. If he kept walking west, he died of thirst. If he surrendered, he died at the end of a rope. But if he went back, they wouldn't be looking behind them. Hunters look forward. They look at the tracks. They don't look at the ground they've already covered. "The circle," Eldridge said. He stood up. It took 2 tries. He swayed, the world tilting gray at the edges, then steadied himself against the rock. He didn't turn west. He turned north, then cut hard east, moving in a wide arc. He was going back to the wolf's den. He moved slow. He had to. He picked his way through the lava field, stepping on the flat slabs, avoiding the sharp edges that would slice through his wrappings. He used the moonlight, keeping to the shadows of the ridges. He walked for 3 hours. The thirst was a constant, screaming presence in his head, drowning out the pain in his feet. Then he smelled it. Smoke. Mesquite wood burning low. And something else. Coffee. Eldridge stopped. He flared his nostrils, pulling the scent in. It was faint, drifting on the night breeze, but it was there. He moved toward it. He crested a low rise and looked down into a shallow draw. The camp was there. It was smaller than the wagon camp. A fly camp. They had left the wagon behind to move fast. Just the men and the horses. A small fire burned in the center, just a bed of coals now. The soldiers were bedded down in a circle, wrapped in blankets. The horses were on a picket line, heads low, resting. Eldridge crouched. He watched. There was a sentry. He was walking a slow perimeter, his carbine shouldered. He looked bored. He looked at the west, at the empty dark where the fugitive was supposed to be running. He didn't look east. Eldridge licked his lips again. He needed water. If he didn't drink soon, he wouldn't have the strength to fight, let alone run. He looked at the water bags hanging from the saddles on the ground near the fire. Canvas Lister bags, sweating cool moisture. He had to get close. He crawled. He moved on his belly, using his elbows and knees, dragging his body over the hardpan. He became a lizard. A snake. He moved only when the sentry turned his back. 20 yards. 10. He reached the edge of the firelight. He was behind a saddle pile. He could hear the soldiers breathing. He could hear the corporal snoring, a soft, wet rattle. The sentry walked past, boots crunching softly. He paused, looked at the fire, and kept walking. Eldridge slid forward. He reached the nearest saddle. A canteen was hooked to the horn. He unhooked it. The metal clinked against a stirrup iron. Ting. The sound was tiny, but in the silence it was a bell. The sentry stopped. He turned. "Who's there?" Eldridge froze. He lay flat, pressing his face into the dirt. He held the canteen tight against his chest to muffle the slosh. The sentry racked the bolt of his carbine. "Speak? That you?" No answer. The sentry walked toward the saddles. He squinted into the dark. He was 10 feet away. "I heard something," the sentry muttered. He took another step. A horse on the picket line blew out a breath and stamped its hoof. The sentry relaxed. He lowered the rifle. Damn horses. Spooky. He turned and walked away, resuming his beat. Eldridge let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He uncorked the canteen. He didn't gulp. He took a small sip. The water was lukewarm, tasting of tin and canvas, but it was life. He held it in his mouth, letting it soak in. He swallowed. He took another sip. Then a third. He capped the canteen. He didn't put it back. He clipped it to his belt loop. He had water. Now, he needed to know the plan. He looked at the sleeping forms. Hatcher was there, near the fire, sleeping on a cot he must have made them pack. He had a bottle next to his hand. And Speak. The tracker wasn't sleeping with the men. He was apart, curled up near a rock on the edge of the light. He lay still, but his eyes were open. He was staring at the stars. Eldridge shrank back into the shadow of the saddle. Speak was the danger. The soldiers were just noise, Speak was the eyes. Voices drifted from the other side of the fire. Two men were sitting up, sharing a smoke. The sergeant and a private. "He ain't gonna make it," the private whispered. "Not barefoot. Not in this country." "He made it this far," the sergeant said. "He's tough. I'll give him that. Captain says he's dead by noon tomorrow. Says the sun will cook him." "Captain says a lot of things," the sergeant said. He spat into the coals. "Captain wants him dead so he don't have to explain the money." Eldridge leaned in. "The money." "What money?" the private asked. "The payoff," the sergeant said, his voice dropping lower. "From Vance. You think we're chasing one drifter across hell because of duty? We're chasing him because he saw the ranch. He saw the crates. The rifles." "The rifles," the sergeant agreed. "Vance is arming the Comanches. Hatcher is looking the other way. And getting paid in gold to do it." "Jesus," the private said. "If the army finds out." "The army won't find out," the sergeant said. "Because nobody is going back to tell them. Except us. And we're getting a cut." The sergeant tossed his cigarette into the fire. "Get some sleep," the sergeant said. "We meet Vance tomorrow. At the canyon." "He's meeting us?" "To pay up. And to make sure the job is done. He wants to see the body." "He's gonna see a dried-up husk," the private said. They lay down. Eldridge stayed still. Vance was coming. Tomorrow. To a canyon. The circle was closing. Eldridge looked at the canteen on his hip. He looked at the knife in his belt. He had water. He had the location. And he knew the stakes. He backed away. He crawled inch by inch, fading into the darkness until the fire was just a spark in the distance. He stood up. He felt stronger. The water was working. "Vance," Eldridge whispered. He wasn't running west anymore. He was going to the canyon. He was going to meet the man who paid for the bullets. He turned and walked into the night, moving silent and cold, a Badlands spirit with a new direction. Chapter 14. The rider didn't sneak in. He rode in. Eldridge Sample lay flat in the sagebrush, 50 feet from the fire. He held his breath, pressing his face into the dirt to hide the shine of his skin. He heard the horse first. It was a heavy animal, shod with iron, moving with a steady, confident rhythm that said it knew the way and didn't care who heard it coming. It crushed the brush, snapping dry twigs. The sentry, the one who had almost stepped on Eldridge earlier, spun around. He leveled his carbine. "Halt!" the sentry barked. "Identify." "Put it down, Private," Captain Hatcher's voice came from the cot. Hatcher sat up, rubbing his eyes. He capped his flask. It's the money. The rider entered the circle of firelight. It was Colonel Vance. He looked exactly as he had on the porch of the Double V. He wore a linen duster over his white suit and a white plantation hat that glowed in the moonlight. He rode a massive gray gelding that looked like it ate better than most of the soldiers. Vance pulled up. He didn't dismount. He sat there, looking down at the camp like a landlord inspecting a tenant's pigsty. "You're hard to find, Captain," Vance said. His voice was smooth, devoid of the dust that coated everything else. "We're working," Hatcher said. He stood up, buttoning his tunic, trying to summon a scrap of dignity. "Chasing your ghost." "My ghost seems to be lively," Vance said. "He killed 3 of your men. Or so I hear." "He got lucky," Hatcher said. "We got him on the run now. He's barefoot. No water. He'll be dead by noon tomorrow." "I prefer dead now," Vance said. He swung down from the saddle. His boots hit the ground with a solid thud. He dusted off his sleeves. "Coffee?" Hatcher asked. "I have my own," Vance said. He walked to the fire. He looked at the soldiers sleeping in their blankets. He looked at the sergeant, who was sitting up, watching him with greedy eyes. "Where is he?" Vance asked. "He's out there," Hatcher pointed west. "In the lava field. We cut his sign at sundown. Speak says he's limping." Speak says a lot for a man who doesn't talk. Vance looked around. "Where is the mute?" "Out there," Hatcher said. "Hunting." Vance nodded. He reached into his saddlebag, a fine leather bag with silver buckles. He pulled out a box of cigars. He offered one to Hatcher. Hatcher took it. "Thanks." Vance lit his own with a gold lighter. The flame flared, illuminating his face. It was calm, unbothered. "The delivery is scheduled for Tuesday," Vance said. Eldridge, lying in the dark, inched forward. He needed to hear the numbers. "Tuesday," Hatcher repeated. He lit his cigar from a twig in the fire. "That's tight, Colonel. My men are tired. We've been chasing this drifter for 2 days." "The drifter is a distraction," Vance said. "The delivery is the business. The Comanches are waiting at the Painted Rock. They expect the goods." "We got the goods," the sergeant said, speaking up. 10 crates. Winchesters. And the ammunition. "And the whiskey," Vance added. "Don't forget the whiskey. It greases the wheels." "Why?" Hatcher asked. He blew a ring of smoke. "I mean, I get the land grab. You want the range. But arming them? That's risky. They could turn those rifles on us." Vance smiled. It was the same cold smile he'd given Eldridge on the porch. "They won't," Vance said. "Because they need the ammunition. As long as I control the lead, I control the trigger." Vance walked to the edge of the firelight. He looked out at the dark desert. "It's a simple arrangement, Captain. I give them the means to hunt. They hunt the things I don't want." "The settlers," Eldridge whispered to himself. "Sodbusters," Hatcher said. "Fences. Sheep." "Vermin," Vance corrected. "They come out here with their plows and their Bibles, and they think they can tame the land. They carve it up. They ruin the grass." Vance turned back to the fire. "The Comanches, they're just a force of nature," Vance said. "Like a drought. Or a blizzard. They scour the land clean. They burn the shacks. They scare off the weak. And when they're done, the land is empty. Ready for cattle." "And the army?" Hatcher asked. "What happens when the general finds out we're supplying hostiles?" "The general sees what I tell him to see," Vance said. "He sees raids. He sees the need for more troops. More funding. He gets his war. You get your pay." I get the grass. It's a neat circle, the sergeant said. It's an ecosystem, Vance said. He reached into his saddlebag again. He pulled out a heavy canvas sack. It clinked when it hit the ground. Half now, Vance said. The rest when the rifles are delivered. And when I see the body of Mr. Sample. Hatcher looked at the bag. He licked his lips. We'll get him, Colonel. Don't worry about that. I don't worry, Vance said. Worry is for poor people. Eldridge watched. He had the confession. He had the motive. Vance wasn't just a rancher protecting his herd. He was an architect of slaughter. He was using the Comanches as a demolition crew, clearing the way for his empire, and using the U.S. Cavalry as his personal cleanup squad. The rifles are in the wagon, Vance asked. Buried under the flour, Hatcher said. Safe. Good. Tuesday. Painted Rock. Don't be late. Chato gets impatient. Chato, Eldridge mouthed the name. It was the same chief. The same war party. The connection was solid. Vance finished his cigar. He dropped the butt and ground it out with his heel. I'm riding back, Vance said. It's cooler at the ranch. You want an escort? Hatcher asked. I have my own men waiting on the road, Vance said. Besides, the Comanches won't touch me. They know the brand. Vance walked to his horse. He swung up. He looked down at Hatcher. Bring me his ears, Vance said. What? The drifter, Vance said. Sample. Bring me his ears. I want to nail them to the barn door. A warning to the next man who trespasses on the double V. Consider it done, Hatcher said. Vance turned the gray horse. He rode out of the camp, disappearing into the night as quickly as he had arrived. Hatcher stood there for a moment, looking at the bag of gold on the ground. He picked it up. He weighed it. Heavy, the sergeant said. Heavy enough to forget about the heat, Hatcher said. He tossed the bag to the sergeant. Stow it. And get some sleep. We move at first light. The camp settled down. The sergeant put the money in his saddlebag. The soldiers rolled back into their blankets. Eldridge lay in the brush. He had water in his belly. He had a knife in his belt. And now he had the truth. It wasn't enough to survive. It wasn't enough to run. He looked at the sleeping soldiers. He looked at the direction Vance had written. Tuesday, Eldridge whispered. He backed away. He moved inch by inch, sliding over the hardpan until the fire was just a spark. He stood up. He turned west. He wasn't running away from them anymore. He was running toward something. Toward the homesteads. Toward the people who didn't know they were just weeds in Colonel Vance's garden. He started walking. Chapter 15. The fire was a red pinprick behind him, fading into the black scrub. Eldridge Sample didn't look back at it. He looked at the ground in front of his feet, or where his feet would be if he could see them. The moon had slid behind a bank of cloud, turning the desert into a room with the lights out. He walked with his knees bent, testing the earth before committing his weight. He was barefoot inside the rags of his shirt bandages, and every cactus spine was a potential cripple. He moved slow. He had the water. He had the knife. He had the date. Tuesday, he thought. Painted Rock. He had to get there first. He had to beat Vance's wagon. He had to beat the cavalry. But first, he had to beat the shadow that had separated itself from the night. He stopped. He didn't hear a footstep. He didn't hear a twig snap. He felt a displacement of air, a shift in the pressure of the dark, like a door opening in a drafty house. Eldridge sank down. He didn't crouch, he melted. He folded his body into the gap between two clumps of sagebrush, pressing his belly into the hardpan. He pulled the butcher knife from his belt. He laid the blade flat against his arm to hide the dull shine of the steel. He waited. He breathed through his open mouth, silent, shallow sips of air. A lizard skittered across the sand a few feet away. It stopped abruptly. Then a boot. No, not a boot. A moccasin. High-topped, fringed, silent. It stepped into the small clearing Eldridge was watching. It planted itself 6 inches from his nose. Eldridge froze. He stared at the beadwork on the leather, white and blue glass beads sewn in a zigzag pattern. He smelled the man. Old grease. Smoke. The musk of a predator that doesn't wash because the scent of soap alerts the prey. Speak. The tracker stood there. He was looking out toward the west, scanning the horizon for movement. He didn't look down. He didn't know that the man he was hunting was lying between his feet like a snake. Eldridge tightened his grip on the knife handle. If he struck now, he could hamstring him. He could drive the heavy blade into the back of the knee, sever the tendon, bring him down. But Speak wasn't alone. Hatcher and the soldiers were 300 yards back. A scream would bring them running. And a knife fight in the dark with a man who killed for a living wasn't a sure thing. Speak shifted his weight. The leather of the moccasin creaked, a tiny sound. He turned his head. He looked down. He didn't look at the ground, in general. He looked right at the gap in the sagebrush. He knew. Maybe he heard a heartbeat. Maybe he smelled the fear. Or maybe he just felt the eyes on him. Speak didn't jump back. He didn't shout. He leaned down, slow, peering into the shadows. His hand went to his belt. He drew a knife. It was a skinning blade, curved and sharp, the steel dark. Their eyes met. In the gloom, Speak's eyes were black holes. There was no surprise in them. No anger. Just recognition. There you are. He smiled. It was a terrifying expression, a baring of teeth that had nothing to do with humor. He raised the knife. He wasn't going to call the soldiers. He wanted this for himself. Eldridge didn't wait for the downward stroke. He rolled. He threw his body to the left, away from the sagebrush, away from the moccasins. Speak struck. The skinning knife hissed through the air and buried itself in the dirt where Eldridge's neck had been a second before. Eldridge scrambled on his hands and knees. He kicked out, his heel connecting with Speak's shin. Speak grunted, a low guttural sound from a man without a voice. He stumbled, ripping his knife free from the earth. Eldridge didn't try to stand. He crab-walked backward, putting distance between them. Speak recovered. He lunged. He moved like a cat, low and fast. Eldridge slashed with the butcher knife. A defensive swipe meant to back him off. Speak caught Eldridge's wrist. His grip was iron. He twisted, trying to force the blade from Eldridge's hand. Eldridge slammed his forehead into Speak's nose. Bone crunched. Speak released the wrist, reeling back, blood starting to flow. But he didn't drop his own knife. He slashed blindly. The tip of the skinning knife caught Eldridge's coat sleeve. It sliced through the canvas and bit into the forearm. A hot line of pain. Eldridge scrambled back again. His foot found empty air. The ravine. He had been moving parallel to a dry wash, a deep cut in the desert floor. In the dark, he had lost the edge. He slipped. "Damn," Eldridge whispered. He went over the side. He fell. It wasn't a sheer drop, but it was steep. He tumbled down a slope of loose shale and cactus. He hit a rock with his hip, spun, and kept rolling. The world was a blur of dust and pain. He hit the bottom hard. He landed in a bed of dry sand, the wind knocked out of him. He lay there, gasping, waiting for the stars to stop spinning. He gripped the knife. He still had it. He looked up. The rim of the ravine was a dark line against the sky, 20 feet above. A silhouette appeared at the edge. "Speak." The tracker stood there, looking down into the black pit. He held his knife. He wiped his bleeding nose with the back of his hand. He didn't come down. The slope was too steep, the darkness too absolute. Even a wolf doesn't jump into a bear's den without seeing the bottom. Speak watched for a long minute. He was listening. Listening for a groan. Listening for movement. Eldridge didn't move. He held his breath until his lungs burned. Speak sheathed his knife. He picked up a rock. He tossed it into the ravine. The rock clattered down the slope, bouncing, and landed 10 feet from Eldridge. Eldridge didn't flinch. Speak turned. He walked away from the edge, disappearing back into the flatland. Eldridge let the air out of his chest. He checked his arm. The cut was shallow, bleeding, but not pumping. He pressed his hand over it. He checked the canteen. It was bruised, dented, but it hadn't burst. He looked up at the rim again. Speak wasn't gone. He was just repositioning. He would find a way down further along the cut. Or he would wait for morning and track the blood. "He marked me," Eldridge whispered. He stood up. His legs shook. He was battered, cut, and hunted. But he was loose. He turned and started walking down the center of the ravine, moving deeper into the earth, deeper into the dark, putting one painful step in front of the other. Chapter 16. The ravine opened up onto a flat bench of land that looked like a table set for a meal nobody wanted to eat. Eldridge Sample climbed out of the cut. He dragged his wrapped feet over the lip of the bank, his breath hitching in his chest. The cut on his arm was throbbing, a hot rhythmic pulse that matched the beating of his heart. He smelled it before he saw it. It wasn't the clean smell of mesquite smoke. It was the greasy, heavy stench of burning feather mattresses and scorched pork. It was the smell of a home turned inside out and roasted. He stood up. He swayed, catching his balance. A half-mile ahead, a column of smoke rose straight up into the still morning air. "Homestead," Eldridge whispered. He didn't run. He couldn't. He walked, forcing his legs to scissor forward, ignoring the fire in his soles. He reached the edge of the clearing. The cabin had been a soddy, earth walls with a timber roof. Now the roof was gone, collapsed into the interior. The sod walls were blackened, smoking. The corral fence was kicked down. The windmill was still standing, but the blades were locked, tied off with a rope. It was silent. The kind of silence that screams. Eldridge drew the butcher knife. It was a useless gesture against a war party, but his hand needed to hold something. He walked into the yard. He found the man first. The settler was staked out near the woodpile. He had been stripped naked. His skin was white, untanned where his shirt usually covered him, but it was turning red in the sun. He was spread-eagled, rawhide thongs tying his wrists and ankles to pegs driven deep into the hardpan. Eldridge didn't look at the face. He looked at the chest. It was a ruin of cuts. Precision work. They had taken their time. They had peeled him like an orange while he was still alive to feel it. "Slow," Eldridge said. They were slow. He walked past the man. He found the woman near the well. She was face down. She hadn't been staked. She had been used, then clubbed. Her dress was torn, fluttering in the slight breeze. Her hair was gone. A raw, red circle on the back of her skull showed where the knife had done its work. Eldridge knelt. He touched her shoulder. The skin was cold. "Last night," he said, "while I was stealing water." He stood up. He scanned the yard. He saw a tricycle. It was crude, made of wood with iron hoops for wheels. It was lying on its side near the door of the burning soddy. "Kids," Eldridge said. He looked around. He didn't see any small bodies. He walked to the corral. The ground was a churned mess of hoofprints. Unshod ponies. Dozens of them. He saw the tracks of the big roan stallion, the one the leader in the blue vest had been riding. The one he had seen leaving the Double V. "Same bunch," Eldridge said. "Vance's partners." He looked closer at the tracks near the gate. He saw boot prints. Small ones. A child's boots. 2 sets. They weren't running away. They were walking. Being led. He found a spot where a pony had stood. Next to it, the small boot prints stopped. There were drag marks in the dust, heels digging in. Then nothing. "Lift it up," Eldridge said. "Tied on." He followed the trail a few yards. He found a small, white sock lying in a cactus. He picked it up. It was tiny. "Taken," he said. He looked at the horizon. The tracks led west, deep into the caprock. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The bandits in the wash, they were just thieves. Hatcher and his soldiers, they were just greedy. But this was business. Vance paid the Comanches to clear the range. This family wasn't cleared, they were erased. The parents were meat. The children were currency, or slaves, or just toys to be broken later. Eldridge looked back at the rancher's body. He thought about Colonel Vance sitting on his porch, drinking lemonade. "I have an understanding with the people." "Understanding," Eldridge spat the word. He walked to the water trough. It was kicked over, the mud still wet. They had watered their horses and then dumped the rest just to be sure. He went to the well. The rope was cut. The bucket was gone. He looked at the burning house. There was nothing to save. Nothing to bury. The ground was too hard for a knife, and he didn't have a shovel. He stood in the center of the slaughter. He felt the weight of the Mexican coin in his pocket, the one Hatcher had stolen but hadn't found in the first search. No, Hatcher had taken it. He checked his pocket. Empty. "Right," he whispered. "They took it." He didn't have a badge. He didn't have a name. He looked at his reflection in a piece of broken window glass lying in the dirt. He was covered in dust. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. He looked like a dead man walking. He looked at the knife in his hand. The cook's knife. It was dull. He walked to the grindstone near the barn. It was a heavy wheel on a treadle. He sat down. He put his foot on the pedal. Whir. The stone spun. He put the knife blade against the stone. Sparks flew. He ground the edge. He worked it until the steel sang. He worked it until it could shave the hair off his arm. He stood up. He looked back the way he had come. Hatcher was out there. Speak was out there. They were hunting a drifter. They were hunting a victim. Eldridge turned west. He wasn't a victim anymore. He wasn't running. He walked to a mud puddle formed by the overturned trough. He knelt. He scooped up a handful of the red clay. He smeared it on his face. He smeared it on his arms. He covered the white skin, the sweat, the humanity. He stood up. He looked like the land. He looked like the earth itself had stood up and taken a shape. "I'm not leaving," Eldridge said to the dead woman. He turned toward the rocks where the soldiers would come. He didn't check the sun. He didn't check the wind. He just checked the knife. Chapter 17. The mud on Eldridge Sample's skin was drying, cracking into a map of the red earth he stood on. It pulled tight across his face, masking the human expression, leaving only the eyes to move. He stood in the center of the yard. The heat from the burning soddy rolled over him, but he didn't feel it. He was looking at the ground. The tricycle lay on its side near the door. It was a homemade thing, pine blocks and iron barrel hoops. "Two," Eldridge said. He walked a circle around the toy. He found the first print in a patch of soft dust near the woodpile. It was a boot print. Small, maybe 6 inches long. The heel was worn down on the outside edge. Boy, Eldridge guessed. 6, maybe 7. He followed the line. The prints ran from the woodpile toward the house. They were spaced wide apart. Running. They stopped at the corner of the building. Eldridge crouched. He touched the dirt. There was a scuff mark here. A deep gouge where a small heel had dug in, trying to break. "Grabbed?" Eldridge said. He looked for the second set. He found them near the garden patch, where a row of dead corn stalks stood yellow in the sun. These prints were smaller. Button boots. "Girl," he said. 4. Her tracks didn't run. They shuffled. She had been standing there, watching the house burn, watching her parents die. Then the tracks disappeared. There were no drag marks for the girl. "Lifted," Eldridge said. "Picked up like a doll." He stood up. He walked to the corral fence, or what was left of it. The rails were smashed kindling. The ground was a churned soup of pony tracks. He sorted through the mess. He looked for the story in the chaos. He found it near the gate post. A large pony, unshod, had stood there. The ground was stamped down. The horse had shifted its weight, impatient. Eldridge looked at the post. There was a smear of grease on the wood. And a strand of hair. Light brown. Fine. It was caught in a splinter. Eldridge pulled it free. He rolled it between his muddy thumb and forefinger. It was soft. "The girl," he said. He looked at the ground, under the pony's belly line. There were drops of blood. Not a lot. Just a few spots, dark and dried. Spur cut, Eldridge judged. Or they cut her to make her quiet. He moved to the next set of tracks. Another pony. This one had danced, stepping sideways. The boy's tracks appeared again here. But they were different. They were toes only. He was being dragged. Eldridge followed the drag marks. They went for 10 feet, then stopped. There was a depression in the sand where a knee had hit. Then nothing. "Thrown up," Eldridge said. "Tied on." He looked at the pattern of the pony tracks leaving the yard. The main body of the war party, 20 riders, had gone west. They were moving fast, a solid column of destruction. But 2 horses lagged behind. The tracks were deeper, carrying double weight. "Cargo," Eldridge said. He walked out to where the trail straightened out. He found a piece of rawhide thong lying in the sage. He picked it up. It had a knot in it. A slip knot. "Wrist size," he said. He looked west. The children weren't dead. If they were dead, they would be here with their parents. The Comanches didn't carry bodies. They carried trophies. They carried slaves. "They took them," Eldridge whispered. The realization settled on him. It wasn't just a raid. It wasn't just clearing the land for Vance's cows. It was a harvest. He looked at the sun. It was pushing noon. The shadows were short, hiding under the rocks. The children were out there, tied to the backs of ponies that smelled of blood and smoke, heading into the caprock breaks where the heat would cook a man's brain in his skull. Eldridge dropped the rawhide. He looked at his hands. They were covered in the red mud. He looked like the land itself had stood up and taken a shape. He checked the edge of the knife. It was razor sharp. He wasn't hunting soldiers anymore. Not just soldiers. 2, he said. A boy and a girl. He turned his back on the burning house. He walked to the edge of the yard where the tracks led out. He didn't run. He didn't hurry. He moved with a cold, mechanical purpose. He set his feet in the tracks of the ponies. He was going to get them back. Or he was going to pile the bodies so high the buzzards would have to climb to eat. Chapter 18. The grindstone hissed. Yes. Eldridge Sample sat on the wooden bench, his foot working the treadle with a steady, hypnotic rhythm. He held the cook's butcher knife against the spinning wheel. Sparks flew, hot and orange, dying in the red mud at his feet. He wasn't looking at the knife. He was looking at the heat waves, shimmering on the eastern horizon. Hatcher was out there. Speak was out there. They were following a trail of blood and bare footprints, thinking they were tracking a wounded animal that was running for its life. They were wrong. Eldridge tested the edge of the knife with his thumb. It bit the skin, drawing a thin red bead. Sharp enough, he said. He stood up. The burning soddy had collapsed into a pile of smoldering turf. The smoke was thinning out, drifting west. The bodies of the settlers were already attracting the first flies. Eldridge looked at them. He didn't feel pity anymore. Pity was heavy. Pity slowed you down. He felt a cold, hard clarity that he hadn't felt since the war. Since the Shenandoah. Since the days when he wore gray and learned that burning a barn was just a tactical decision. He took off his canvas coat. He threw it on the ground. It was too hot, too heavy, and too visible. He took off his shirt. He stood bare-chested in the sun. His skin was pale where the clothes had covered it, scarred from the beating Hatcher's men had given him, and from older things that hadn't healed right. He walked to the puddle of mud by the trough. He scooped up the red clay. It was thick, cool. He started with his chest. He smeared the mud over his ribs, covering the white skin. He worked it down his arms, over his shoulders. He coated his neck. He wasn't painting himself like a Comanche. He wasn't trying to look like a warrior. He was trying to look like the ground. He was trying to become a piece of the landscape that could stand up and kill. He covered his face. He left only his eyes clear. They looked out of the mask of mud, blue and flat. The Terror. That's what they had called him in the valley. Before he was a marshal. Before he was a drifter. When he was a boy with a rifle who didn't know when to stop. He picked up the knife. He wiped the clay off the handle. He needed a good grip. He looked at the tracks leading out of the yard. The children were gone. Taken west. "I'm coming," Eldridge whispered. "But I have to clean the floor first." He walked to the edge of the homestead. He looked east. The terrain dropped away into a series of broken arroyos and rock shelves. It was a maze. A place where a man on a horse had to watch his footing, and a man on foot could disappear. Eldridge scanned the ground. He saw the dust cloud. It was small, tight. 10 miles back. "Hatcher," he said. The captain was pushing hard. He wanted to catch his prisoner before the heat killed him. Or maybe he just wanted to watch the dying. He was arrogant. He thought he was the hunter. Eldridge turned. He walked into the rocks. He moved differently now. He didn't walk with the trudging gait of a man covering distance. He moved with a high step, placing the balls of his feet on solid stone, avoiding the gravel that crunched. He crouched low, using the brush for cover. He found a spot a mile from the homestead. It was a narrow defile. A cut in the sandstone where the trail necked down to a single horse width. The walls were 10 feet high. The shadows were deep. Eldridge climbed the wall. He found a ledge, an overhang of rock that shielded him from the sun and the view from the trail. He lay down. The rock was warm against his belly. The mud on his skin began to dry, tightening, turning him into a statue. He placed the knife on the rock next to his hand. He waited. Time stopped mattering. The sun moved. The shadows lengthened. A scorpion crawled past his nose, its tail curled. Eldridge didn't blink. He breathed shallow, expanding his back instead of his chest, keeping his profile flat. He let the drifter die. He let the lawman die. He went back to the beginning, to the silence, to the breath before the trigger. He heard them. It wasn't a hoofbeat. It was the jingle of a bit chain, the creak of leather. Then the voice. "I smell smoke." Speak didn't say it, but the sergeant did. "Captain, I smell smoke." "Homestead," Hatcher's voice drifted up. It was rough, impatient. "Probably the Comanches. We're close." "Tracks are fresh here," the sergeant said. He was running. "He's panicking," Hatcher said. "He knows we're on him. Keep pushing." "Speak says he's bleeding." The horses came into view. Speak was in the lead on his paint pony. He was leaning over the neck, his eyes scanning the dirt. He stopped right below Eldridge's ledge. He looked at the ground. He frowned. The tracks stopped here. Or rather, they vanished. Eldridge had stepped from the trail onto the rock face and climbed. Speak looked around. He looked at the brush. He looked at the sky. He didn't look up. Not straight up. He signaled to Hatcher. "Lost sign." Hatcher rode up on his big bay. He was red-faced, sweating. "What do you mean, lost?" Hatcher demanded. "He can't fly." The soldiers crowded into the defile. 10 men on horses jammed into a chute. They were hot. They were tired. They were looking at the ground, at the tracker, at the captain. They weren't looking at the rock wall. Eldridge watched them. He picked his target. Not Hatcher. Not Speak. They were the leaders. If he killed them first, the soldiers might scatter or they might dig in. He wanted the one in the rear. The drag rider. The straggler. A private. Young. He was looking at his canteen, shaking it. The column started to move again. Speak found a scratch on a rock further up the trail, a false lead Eldridge had left. "Move out," Hatcher ordered. They rode past. One by one. The drag rider lingered. He uncorked his canteen. He tilted his head back to drink. Eldridge moved. He didn't jump. He slid. He poured himself off the ledge like water, silent and fluid. He landed behind the horse. The horse sensed him. It started to swing its hindquarters. Eldridge stepped in. He reached up. He didn't stab. He grabbed the private's belt with his left hand and the soldier's hair with his right. He pulled. The private came out of the saddle backward. He didn't have time to scream. The water from the canteen splashed onto his face. Eldridge caught him. He drove him into the ground, falling with him, his knees pinning the man's arms. The knife flashed. It was a single, efficient motion. Across the throat. The private's eyes went wide. He tried to take a breath, but the air hissed out of the new opening in his neck. Eldridge rolled off him. He grabbed the man's boots. He pulled them off. They were cavalry boots, black leather, broken in. He grabbed the carbine that had fallen in the dust. A Springfield trapdoor. And the belt with the ammo pouch. The horse had spooked, trotting up the trail to catch the others. Eldridge didn't stay. He didn't loot the pockets. He took the weapons and the boots, and he scrambled up the opposite wall, disappearing into the rocks before the dust had even settled. He sat on a high ridge, pulling the boots on. They were a little big, but they were leather. They were protection. He checked the carbine. Single shot. .45 to 70. Heavy. Reliable. He looked down at the trail. The column had stopped. Hatcher was shouting. They had found the empty saddle. They were turning back. They were going to find the body. Now you know, Eldridge whispered. He wasn't running anymore. He was hunting. And the terror was back in business. Chapter 19. The riderless horse trotted up the trail, its stirrups flapping against its ribs like broken wings. It stopped 10 yards from Captain Hatcher, blowing hard, its eyes wide and rimmed with white. "That's Private Miller's mount," the sergeant said. His voice was tight. Hatcher stared at the horse. He looked at the empty saddle. He looked at the trail, winding back into the shadows of the defile they had just ridden through. "Where is he?" Hatcher demanded. "Where's Miller?" "He stopped to drink," a corporal said. "He was right behind me." "Go back," Hatcher ordered. He pulled his revolver. "Sergeant, take 2 men. Find him. If he's sleeping, shoot him. If he's deserted, shoot him twice." The sergeant nodded. He signaled to the corporal and another private. They turned their horses and rode back down the narrow cut. They moved slow, carbines resting on their thighs, their eyes scanning the canyon walls. Hatcher waited. The heat in the defile was stifling, trapped between the rock faces. He wiped sweat from his neck. Speak, the tracker, sat on his pony a few feet away. He wasn't looking at the trail. He was looking at the rocks above. He sniffed the air. He made a sign with his hand, a chopping motion. "What?" Hatcher asked. Speak pointed to the ground. Then he pointed to his own throat. A shout came from down the trail. "Captain!" The sergeant's voice echoed off the stone. It wasn't a shout of discovery. It was a shout of horror. "Captain, get down here." Hatcher spurred his bay. He rode past the nervous soldiers, pushing through the brush. He found them 100 yards back. The sergeant and the 2 privates were dismounted, standing in a circle around something in the dirt. They were pale. The corporal was leaning against his horse, looking like he was about to be sick. Hatcher rode up. He looked down. Private Miller was lying on his back in the center of the trail. He wasn't just dead. He was arranged. His arms were crossed over his chest. His legs were straight. But his boots were gone. His socks were bloody, the heels scraped raw. And his throat. Hatcher grimaced. The cut was deep, ear to ear. It wasn't a desperate slash. It was a surgical opening. The blood had pooled around the head, turning the red dirt black. "His carbine is gone," the sergeant whispered. "And his belt." "He took the boots," the corporal said. "He took the boots." Hatcher looked at the body. He looked at the rock ledge above it. He saw the slide marks in the dust where someone had come down. "He dropped on him," Hatcher said. "Like a cat." "He was unarmed," the sergeant said. "Miller had a carbine. He had a pistol. The drifter, he had a knife. Just a knife." "He has a carbine now," Hatcher said. He looked up at the rim rock. The sun was glaring off the edge, making it impossible to see into the shadows. "He's watching us," Hatcher said. The silence of the canyon pressed in. The horses shuffled, smelling the blood. The flies were already arriving, a low buzzing hum that sounded like electricity. "This ain't a drifter," the sergeant said. He looked at Hatcher. "Captain, drifters don't do this. They run. They hide. They don't harvest." "He's trying to scare you," Hatcher said. "He's trying to make you jumpy." "It's working," the corporal muttered. "Shut up," Hatcher roared. "He's one man. One man with a stolen gun and boots that don't fit. We are the United States Cavalry. We don't run from trash." Crack. The shot came from high up. From the rim. It wasn't a wild shot. It was a statement. The bullet hit the ground 6 inches from Hatcher's horse. It kicked up a spray of gravel that stung the captain's face. The horse reared, screaming. Hatcher fought the reins, cursing, keeping his seat. "Cover!" the sergeant yelled. The soldiers scrambled. They dove behind rocks, behind their horses. They pointed their carbines at the skyline, firing blindly. Bang, bang, bang. Smoke filled the defile. "Cease fire!" Hatcher yelled. "Save your rounds. You can't hit him." He looked up at the rim. Nothing moved. Just the heat waves and the rocks. "He missed," the corporal said, his voice shaking. "He missed you, Captain." "He didn't miss," Hatcher said. His voice was cold. "He's got a Springfield now. 45-70. He could have taken my head off." "Then why didn't he?" "Because he wants us to know," Hatcher said. "He wants us to know the rules have changed." Hatcher looked back at the body of Private Miller. He looked at the bare, bloody feet. "Speak," Hatcher yelled. The tracker rode up. He looked at the dead man. He looked at the rim. He didn't look scared. He looked interested. "Go get him," Hatcher said. "Go up there. Root him out." Speak shook his head. He signed no. He pointed to the narrow trail. He pointed to the rocks. He made a circle with his finger. "Trap." "I don't care if it's a trap," Hatcher screamed. "I pay you to hunt." Speak just sat on his pony. He folded his arms. He wasn't going up that wall. Not alone. Not against a man who dropped from the sky and took boots. Hatcher looked at his men. They were huddled behind cover, eyes wide, sweating. They were looking at the rim, waiting for the next shot. "Get the body," Hatcher said. "Throw him over a saddle. We're moving." "Moving where?" the sergeant asked. "Forward," Hatcher said. "To the box canyon. We get into the open. We can't fight him in a chute. He's got the high ground, Captain." "He's got 1 gun," Hatcher shouted. "We got 9. Now move." The soldiers dragged Miller's body. They heaved it onto his horse, tying it down. The head flopped loose, the cutthroat gaping. They mounted up. They didn't ride in a column. They rode in a bunch, shoulders touching, looking up at the cliffs. Hatcher rode at the front. He kept his pistol drawn. He felt the eyes on him. High above, on the rim of the canyon, Eldridge Sample watched them. He sat in the shade of a boulder, the stolen carbine across his knees. He was wearing the dead private's boots. They were a little loose, but the leather was thick. He worked the action of the Springfield. He ejected the spent shell. He picked it up. He put it in his pocket. "One," Eldridge whispered. He watched the blue coats scurry down the trail like ants escaping a kicked hill. They were panicked. They were sloppy. He stood up. He didn't run. He walked along the rim, matching their pace. He was the hawk now. They were the rabbits. He touched the mud on his face. It was dry, hard. "Keep walking, Captain," Eldridge said. "The day is long." He moved into the rocks, vanishing into the landscape, a shadow with a rifle and a debt to collect. Chapter 20. The body of Private Miller was a dead weight, tied across the saddle of his own horse, his head bobbing with a loose, rubbery rhythm that sickened the men riding behind him. Captain Hatcher rode stiff-backed at the front of the column, his eyes fixed on the heat waves shimmering off the canyon floor. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He could hear the muttering in the ranks. It sounded like dry leaves scraping together, a friction of fear that was ready to spark. "He took the boots," the corporal whispered to the sergeant. "Why did he take the boots?" "Because he's barefoot," the sergeant said. "And because he wanted us to see it." See what? That he didn't just kill him, the sergeant said. He undressed him. He took the time. While we were 5 minutes up the trail, the patrol moved through a landscape that felt hostile. The red rock walls of the defile had opened up, but the feeling of being watched hadn't left. It sat on their shoulders like a wet wool coat. Hatcher pulled his flask. He shook it. Empty. He threw it into the brush. Speak, Hatcher rasped. The tracker rode up on his paint pony. He looked different. The boredom was gone from his face, replaced by a tight animal alertness. He kept looking at the skyline, his eyes darting from rock to rock. You said he was limping, Hatcher said. Speak didn't answer. He just stared at Hatcher. You said he was bleeding, Hatcher said, his voice rising. A bleeding man don't drop 20 feet off a ledge and cut a throat without making a sound. Speak signed he is a ghost. He ain't a ghost. Hatcher shouted. The sound cracked in the dry air. He's a man. A drifter. A saddle tramp who got lucky. The soldiers jumped. They looked at their captain. They saw the sweat stains on his tunic, the wild look in his eyes. They saw a man who was losing the grip on his own command. Captain, the sergeant said, riding forward. We need to stop. The horses are blown. The men, they're spooked. We stop when he's dead, Hatcher said. We don't even know where he is, the sergeant argued. He could be anywhere. He could be right there. He pointed to a cluster of boulders on the ridge. He's heading for the Box Canyon, Hatcher said. It's the only water for 10 miles. He'll go there. He just drank a canteen full of Miller's water, the sergeant said. He ain't thirsty no more. Hatcher turned on him. He put his hand on his revolver. You questioning me, Sergeant? The sergeant looked at the gun. He looked at Hatcher. He looked at the dead private, draped over the saddle. I'm questioning the intel, the sergeant said carefully. You said he was a rustler. A bandit. He is. Bandits shoot back, the sergeant said. They run. They don't do this. He gestured at Miller's throat. This is war work. This is Shenandoah work. Or Apache work. He's white, Hatcher said. He's been to school, the corporal chimed in, his voice shaking. He knows how to unjoint a man. Look at the cut. One motion. No hesitation. The panic was spreading. It wasn't a panic of running. It was a panic of realization. They had thought they were hunting a rabbit. Now they realized they were in the cage with a tiger. Shut up, Hatcher hissed. All of you. He looked at the terrain ahead. The trail widened, leading into a bowl of rock surrounded by high mesas. The Box Canyon. We get to the canyon, Hatcher said. We bottle him up. We use the long guns. No more close work. He's got a Springfield now, the corporal said. He's got range. He's got one shot, Hatcher lied. He didn't have time to take the belt. He took the belt, the sergeant said. I checked. Miller's ammo pouch is gone. He's got 40 rounds of government, 45-70. Hatcher stared at the sergeant. He wanted to shoot him. He wanted to shoot something, just to hear the noise and feel the recoil, to prove that he was still the one holding the hammer. But he needed them. Move out, Hatcher ordered. The column started again. It was slower now. The horses sensed the rider's fear. They pinned their ears, fighting the bit. Speak rode point. But he rode differently. He hung back, keeping the soldiers between him and the high ground. He wasn't leading anymore. He was surviving. They passed a stand of ocotillo. The long, thorny stalks looked like skeleton fingers reaching out to grab them. A stone clattered down the slope to their left. Every head snapped around. 10 carbines leveled at the noise. Hold fire, Hatcher yelled. It was just a rock, dislodged by the wind, or a lizard, or a boot. He's playing with us, the corporal whispered. He's hurting us. He's one man, Hatcher screamed. Stop acting like old women. But Hatcher felt it too. The itch between his shoulder blades. The feeling that the landscape itself had turned against them. The red rocks looked like blood. The white dust looked like bone. They rode into the mouth of the box canyon. It was a trap. Any fool could see it. Steep walls on 3 sides. One way in. But Hatcher pressed on. He had to. If he turned back now, he admitted defeat. If he turned back, he had to explain the dead private to Colonel Vance without a head to show for it. The sergeant rode up beside him. Captain, the sergeant said softly, if we go in there, and he's on the rim. We have superior numbers, Hatcher said. It was a prayer, not a tactic. Numbers don't count when you're shooting fish in a barrel, the sergeant said. And we're the fish. Hatcher looked at him. He saw the insubordination rising behind the sergeant's eyes. It was close. One more push, and they would mutiny. They would turn their horses and ride for the fort, leaving Hatcher alone. He's tired, Hatcher said. He's hurt. He's barefoot. No, he has the boots. Hatcher rubbed his face. He felt the grit. We go in, Hatcher said. We sweep the floor. If he's there, we flush him. If he's not, we wait for him to come to us. He's already coming to us, the sergeant said. They rode into the shadow of the canyon. The air was cooler here, but it smelled stagnant. It smelled of trapped heat and fear. Private Miller's horse stumbled. The body shifted, the head flopping against the saddle fender with a wet thud. The sound echoed off the canyon walls. Thud. 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 It sounded like a drum. A slow, steady beat, calling them to the slaughter. Hatcher drew his revolver. He thumbed the hammer back. Keep your eyes up, Hatcher whispered. But nobody looked up. They looked at the ground. They looked at their own hands. They were afraid to look at the rim, afraid to see the muddy face of the man who had turned the hunter into the prey. Chapter 21. The canyon walls closed in like the jaws of a stone trap, shutting out the wind and holding the heat until the air shimmered like oil. Captain Hatcher rode at the front, his revolver drawn, the hammer cocked. He kept turning in his saddle, looking at the rimrock 300 feet above, then looking back at his men. His neck was red, the skin peeling in strips from the sunburn. Keep moving, Hatcher said. He's in here. I can feel him. We're running out of room, Captain, the sergeant said. He was riding a nervous roan that kept skittering sideways every time a pebble rolled. This is a box. We hit the back wall, we're done. We hit the back wall, we turn around and sweep it, Hatcher snapped. He's on foot. He can't fly. He came down that cliff back there, the corporal whispered to the man next to him. Maybe he can fly. They rode deeper. The ground was littered with boulders the size of wagons, fallen from the rim centuries ago. It was bad ground for horses. Good ground for an ambush. Speak rode in the drag position. The tracker wasn't looking at the ground anymore. He was riding with his head tilted back, watching the skyline. He knew the terrain. He knew that a box canyon was a slaughterhouse if you didn't hold the high ground. He kept his pony near the canyon wall, hugging the shadow. The patrol rounded a bend. The canyon ended. A sheer face of red sandstone rose up 500 feet, smooth and vertical. There was no way out. No goat path. No chimney. Just a dead end filled with silence and heat. Hatcher pulled his bay up. He stared at the wall. Damn, Hatcher whispered. Turn him, the sergeant yelled. Get him around. Back out. The patrol disintegrated into a confusion of turning horses. The narrow floor was crowded. Stirrups clicked against stirrups. Men swore, sawing on reins, trying to spin their mounts in the tight space. High above, on the north rim, Eldridge Sample adjusted his elbows on the rock ledge. He had been waiting for 20 minutes. He had watched them ride in, a line of blue ants crawling into a bottle. He had let them pass below him, waiting until they hit the cork. He looked through the sights of the stolen Springfield carbine. The rear sight was a buckhorn V, the front a simple blade. It was a soldier's gun, rugged and heavy. He rested the barrel on a flat stone. He didn't aim at Hatcher. Hatcher was the dessert. He aimed at the corporal, the one who had eaten the peaches. The corporal was fighting his horse, trying to turn it near a cluster of boulders in the center of the wash. Eldridge shifted his aim. He lowered the muzzle. He didn't aim at the man. He aimed at the horse. "Sorry," Eldridge whispered. He squeezed the trigger. Boom. The .45 to 70 slug hit the corporal's horse in the shoulder. It shattered the bone and punched into the heart. The horse didn't rear. It collapsed. It went down like a building demolition, dropping straight into the gravel. The corporal screamed. He didn't have time to kick free. The horse fell on his right leg, pinning him to the ground. The saddle horn drove into his gut. "I'm pinned," the corporal shrieked. "My leg. Get it off me." The echo of the shot rolled back and forth across the canyon walls, magnifying the sound, making it impossible to tell where it came from. "Sniper!" Hatcher roared. "Take cover!" The soldiers scrambled. They dove from their saddles, hitting the dirt, looking for rocks. They dragged their horses down, forcing them to lie flat or letting them run loose. The corporal was stuck. He was in the open, trapped under 1,200 pounds of dead meat. He was thrashing, clawing at the dirt, trying to pull his leg free. "Help me," he yelled. "Sergeant, help me." Eldridge worked the trapdoor action. He flipped the latch, ejecting the hot brass casing. He thumbed a fresh cartridge in and snapped it shut. He aimed. The corporal was looking up at the rim now. He saw the puff of smoke. He saw the death coming. Eldridge fired. The bullet hit the corporal in the chest. It ended the screaming. "One," Eldridge said. Down in the canyon, panic set in. "Where is he?" A private yelled, firing his carbine blindly at the south rim. "I can't see him." "North rim," the sergeant shouted. Muzzle flash. High up. The soldiers shifted their fire. They started pouring lead at the north wall. Bullets chipped the stone 10 feet below Eldridge's position, whining off into the sky. Eldridge slid back. He stayed low. He moved. He crab-walked 20 yards to his right, finding a new gap in the rocks. He looked down. The soldiers were pinned. They were huddled behind dead horses and boulders. Hatcher was behind a large slab of sandstone, screaming orders that nobody was following. But there was one man exposed. A private was trying to calm his horse. The animal was spooked, dancing in the middle of the wash, pulling on the reins. The private was standing up, trying to grab the bridle. Eldridge settled the rifle. He shot the horse. The bullet took the animal in the neck. It dropped instantly, kicking up a cloud of dust. The private stumbled, losing his balance as the horse went down. He fell backward. He sat up dazed. He looked at his dead mount. Eldridge racked the action. Click-clack. He shot the private. The man slumped back into the dust, his hand still gripping the reins of the dead horse. "Two," Eldridge said. "Stop shooting the horses." Hatcher screamed. His voice was cracking. "He's killing the mounts." "He's pinning us, Captain," the sergeant yelled from behind a rock. "He puts the horse down, Then he picks the man off. It's a turkey shoot. Eldridge ejected the shell. He reached into his pocket, Miller's pocket, and pulled out another round. He watched them. They were terrified. They weren't fighting a man, they were fighting the geography. The canyon was a funnel, and they were at the bottom. Hatcher popped up. He fired 3 rounds from his revolver at the rim. It was a useless gesture. The range was too long for a pistol. "Face me," Hatcher screamed. "Come down here and fight like a man." Eldridge didn't answer. He didn't shoot Hatcher. He let the fear marinate. He looked for Speak. The tracker wasn't in the open. He wasn't behind a rock. His paint pony was standing near the canyon wall, reins trailing. But the rider was gone. Eldridge scanned the base of the cliffs. He saw movement in the shadows. Speak was climbing. He was moving up a chimney cut in the rock, quiet as a lizard. He was flanking. He was coming up to the rim. "Smart," Eldridge said. If Eldridge stayed here, shooting fish in a barrel, Speak would pop up behind him and put a knife in his kidney. Eldridge looked at the sun. It was high overhead. He had thinned the herd. He had taken 2 guns off the board. He had them pinned, scared and bleeding. He stood up, keeping below the skyline. He turned his back on the canyon floor. He looked at the terrain on the mesa top. It was broken rock, fissures and caves. Good ground for a knife fight. "Come on up, tracker," Eldridge whispered. He moved away from the edge. He didn't run. He walked, picking his spot. He needed a place where the rifle didn't matter. A place where it was close. He found a narrow ravine that cut back into the mesa. Dark. Shadowed. He stepped into it. He leaned the Springfield against the wall. He drew the knife. The cook's butcher knife, sharp as a razor. He waited. Chapter 22. The ravine was darker than the inside of a closed fist. Eldridge Sample stepped into it, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. The air smelled of damp earth and bat guano. The walls were narrow, pressing in on his shoulders, forcing him to turn sideways in places. He didn't need the rifle here. A rifle was a stick in a closet. He leaned the stolen Springfield against a rock near the entrance, hidden in the shadow. He would pick it up if he walked out. He drew the knife. The blade was heavy in his hand, the edge honed on the grindstone until it could split a hair. He held it low, edge up. He moved deeper. Speak was coming. Eldridge didn't hear him. He felt him. The pressure in the air changed, a subtle shift in the draft that moved through the fissure. Someone was pushing the air ahead of them. Eldridge stopped. He found a spot where the wall recessed slightly, a shallow cave eroded by water. He backed into it. He pressed himself against the cold stone, becoming part of the geology. He waited. Time stretched. A minute felt like an hour. His heart beat against his ribs, slow and heavy. Thump, thump, thump. A pebble clicked. It was a tiny sound, no louder than a beetle walking on dry leaves. But in the silence of the ravine, it was a shout. Speak appeared. He was a shadow, moving within a shadow. He didn't walk, he flowed. He was crouched low, his paint pony left behind, his skinning knife held in a reverse grip. He scanned the ground, looking for a footprint, a disturbed stone, a drop of sweat. He was 10 feet away. He stopped. He looked at the empty path ahead. He looked at the walls. He sniffed the air. He knew something was wrong. The prey had stopped moving. The prey was waiting. Speak turned his head. He looked right at the recess where Eldridge was hidden. He couldn't see him. The darkness was absolute. But he sensed the void in the pattern. Speak smiled. It was the same baring of teeth Eldridge had seen in the desert. He stepped forward. He didn't rush. He moved with the confidence of a man who had never lost a fight in the dark. 5 feet. Eldridge lunged. He didn't slash. He drove his shoulder into Speak's chest, slamming him back against the opposite wall. The impact drove the air out of the tracker. He grunted, a wet animal sound. But he didn't drop his knife. Speak twisted, bringing his knee up into Eldridge's stomach. It was a hard, vicious blow. Eldridge gagged, doubling over. Speak slashed. The skinning knife hissed through the air. It caught Eldridge on the left forearm, slicing through the canvas coat and the flesh beneath. Pain flared, hot and sharp. Eldridge ignored it. He grabbed Speak's knife hand with his own bleeding arm, pinning it against the wall. They locked together. It was a test of strength, 2 men straining in the dark, boots scrabbling for purchase on the loose gravel. Speak was strong. Wire muscle strong. He pushed back, his breath hot and sour in Eldridge's face. He opened his mouth in a silent snarl, revealing teeth filed to points. Eldridge brought his own knife up. Speak saw it. He caught Eldridge's wrist with his free hand. They were stalemated, each man holding the other's death. "You talk too much," Eldridge whispered. He headbutted him. He slammed his forehead into the bridge of Speak's nose. Bone crunched. Blood sprayed, warm and sticky. Speak's head snapped back, hitting the stone. His grip faltered. Eldridge ripped his knife hand free. He drove the butcher knife into Speak's belly, up under the ribs. Speak stiffened. His eyes went wide in the gloom. He looked at Eldridge with a terrible intimacy, the look of a man realizing the hunt was over. Eldridge twisted the blade. Speak's mouth opened. He tried to scream, but he had no voice. Just a gargle of blood and air. His knees buckled. He slid down the wall, his weight dragging Eldridge with him. Eldridge pulled the knife out. He stepped back. Speak hit the ground. He curled into a ball, clutching his stomach. He kicked once, twice, his moccasins scraping the dirt. Then he went still. Eldridge stood over him, breathing hard. He clutched his wounded arm. The blood was flowing freely, soaking his sleeve. "One," Eldridge said. "Left." He wiped the knife on Speak's buckskins. He sheathed it. He tore a strip from his coat lining. He wrapped his arm tight, cinching the knot with his teeth. It wouldn't stop the bleeding, but it would slow it down. He looked at the dead tracker. "You should have stayed on the pony," Eldridge said. He walked back to the entrance of the ravine. He picked up the Springfield. He stepped out into the sunlight. It was blinding after the dark. He blinked, adjusting to the glare. He looked down into the box canyon. The soldiers were gone. Dead. Or fled. No, dead. The bodies were still there, in the dust. But Hatcher was alive. The captain was down there. Alone. Eldridge checked the carbine. 1 round in the chamber. 1 in his pocket. He started down the trail. He didn't hide. He walked in the open, his boots crunching on the rock. He wanted Hatcher to see him. He wanted Hatcher to know who was coming. He touched the mud on his face. It was starting to flake off, revealing the man underneath. But the man underneath wasn't the drifter anymore. He was the reckoning. Chapter 23. Captain Hatcher was screaming at a dead horse. "Get up." Hatcher kicked the carcass of the corporal's mount. "Get up, you useless glue bag. Cover me." The horse didn't move. Neither did the corporal, pinned beneath it. The canyon floor was a graveyard of silence, broken only by the captain's ragged, hysterical shouting. Hatcher spun around, his revolver leveled at the canyon wall. He fired at a shadow. Bang! The bullet hit the red rock, and whined away into the sky. "I see you," Hatcher yelled. "Come out. Show yourself." There was no answer, just the heat shimmering off the gravel and the buzzing of the flies that had found the feast. Hatcher backed up until he hit a boulder. He slid down, putting his back against the stone. He fumbled with his gun belt, pulling out loose cartridges. His hands were shaking so bad, he dropped 2 for every one he managed to shove into the loading gate. "Speak," Hatcher screamed. "Where are you? Track him. Earn your money." He listened. He wanted to hear the paint pony. He wanted to hear the sergeant telling him to calm down. He heard boots. Heavy, deliberate steps crunching on the loose rock. Not sneaking. Walking. Hatcher scrambled up. He leveled the Colt. He swung it back and forth, trying to cover the whole canyon at once. "Stay back," Hatcher shrieked. "I got a full cylinder." He didn't. He had 3 rounds. He'd lost count. A figure emerged from the heat haze at the mouth of the ravine. It wasn't a soldier. It wasn't an Indian. It was a golem made of red mud and dried blood. It walked with a rifle held loose in one hand, dragging a leg slightly, but moving with a momentum that felt like a rock slide. Hatcher squinted. The sun was in his eyes. "Who are you?" Hatcher whispered. The figure stopped 20 yards away. The mud on its face had cracked, revealing patches of white skin burned red by the sun. The eyes were blue ice. "Sample," Hatcher said. The name tasted like ash. Eldridge didn't say anything. He just stood there. He held the stolen Springfield carbine at his hip. He looked at Hatcher. He looked at the dead men scattered around the wash. "You killed them," Hatcher said. His voice pitched up, high and thin. "You killed my command." "I cleaned up the mess," Eldridge said. His voice was a rasp, dry as the dust under his boots. "You can't do this. I'm a captain in the United States Cavalry. I have authority." "You have a gun," Eldridge said. "Use it." Hatcher raised the Colt. He aimed at the mud-caked chest. His hand wavered. He looked at the muzzle of the Springfield. It looked like a cannon. He pulled the trigger. Click. Hatcher stared at the gun. He had miscounted. He pulled again. Bang. The shot went wide, hitting the dirt 5 feet to Eldridge's left. Hatcher flinched from his own recoil. He tried to cock the hammer again, but his thumb slipped on the spur. He dropped the gun. It fell in the dust. Hatcher looked at it. He looked at Eldridge. He didn't dive for it. He raised his hands. "I surrender," Hatcher said. He forced a smile. It was a rictus of terror. "I surrender, Sample. You win. Take me in. I'm a prisoner of war." Eldridge worked the action of the Springfield. The hammer clicked back. "War is over," Eldridge said. "No." "Wait," Hatcher took a step back, stumbling over a rock. "The money. The gold. I still have it. In the saddlebag. It's yours. All of it. Just let me ride out." "I don't want your money." "Then what? What do you want?" Hatcher fell to his knees. He clasped his hands. He was crying now, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his cheeks. "I was just following orders. Vance. It was Vance. He made me do it." "He paid you," Eldridge said. "You did it because you liked it." "I have a family." Hatcher lied. "I have a wife in San Antonio." "The sodbuster had a wife too," Eldridge said. "And 2 kids. You didn't ask about them when you took the money to look the other way." Eldridge raised the rifle. He settled the stock against his shoulder. Hatcher stared down the barrel. He saw the end. He saw the darkness waiting behind the flash. "Please," Hatcher whispered. "I'm innocent. We haven't captured a guilty man yet." "You just did," Eldridge said. He didn't aim for the head. That was too quick. He aimed low. He squeezed the trigger. Boom. The heavy .45-70 slug hit Hatcher in the stomach. It punched through the belt buckle, driving metal and lead into the gut. Hatcher doubled over. He made a sound like a deflating bladder. He fell onto his side, curling around the wound. He didn't die. Not yet. He lay in the dirt, gasping, his hands clutching his belly. Blood pooled under him, dark and thick. "It burns," Hatcher wheezed. Eldridge lowered the rifle. He walked over to him. He stood over the dying man, casting a long shadow. "It's supposed to," Eldridge said. He looked around the camp. He saw Hatcher's bay horse. It had pulled its picket pin during the shooting and run to the far end of the canyon, but it was still there, terrified and shaking. Eldridge walked to the horse. He caught the reins. He stroked the animal's nose, calming it. "Easy," he said. "You're under new management." He led the horse back. Hatcher was still moving. He was trying to crawl, dragging himself inches at a time, leaving a wide, wet smear on the rock. "Help me," Hatcher gargled. Eldridge checked the cinch on the bay. He mounted up. He looked down at the captain. "The buzzards are coming," Eldridge said. "Try not to scare them off." He turned the horse. He rode out of the box canyon, leaving the dead soldiers and the dying officer to the silence of the caprock. He had a knife. He had a horse. He had a rifle. And he had an appointment at the Double V. Chapter 24. Chapter 24. The bay horse smelled the grain in the Double V barn 3 miles out. It picked up its pace, its ears pricked forward, eager to be home. It didn't know its master was dying in a box canyon, bleeding into the dirt. It just knew that the sun was going down, and the oats were waiting. Eldridge Sample let the horse have its head. He sat loose in the saddle, the stolen Springfield carbine resting across his thighs. The mud on his skin had dried into a hard red shell. It cracked when he moved, flaking off in dusty patches around his eyes and mouth, but it held. He looked like something that had clawed its way out of a riverbank to walk on 2 legs. He rode out of the breaks and onto the grass of the valley floor. The ranch lay ahead. It was a white island in a sea of darkening green. The main house was lit up, yellow squares of window light spilling onto the veranda. The bunkhouse was noisy, the sounds of men eating, plates clanking, a fiddle scratching out a tune. They were comfortable. They were safe. They were paid. Eldridge checked the load in the carbine. He checked the Colt tucked into his belt, Hatcher's Colt. He felt the weight in his pocket. Not the Mexican coin star. That was gone, sitting in a sergeant's saddlebag in the canyon. He reached into his other pocket. He touched the object he had cut from Hatcher's tunic. It was wet. "Time to deliver the mail," Eldridge said. He rode toward the gate. He didn't sneak. He didn't circle around the back. He rode straight up the main road, the bay's hooves thudding rhythmically on the packed earth. A cowboy was leaning against the corral fence, smoking a cigarette. He saw the horse. He recognized the gate. He recognized the cavalry saddle. "Captain's back," the cowboy called out to a man in the barn doorway. "Looks like he's alone." "Probably drank the others under the table," the second man laughed. Eldridge rode past them. He didn't look at them. In the twilight, covered in mud, slouching in the saddle, he was just a shape. A rider returning. The cowboys didn't look close enough to see the face. They saw what they expected to see. He rode to the hitching rail in front of the main house. He dismounted. The bay shook itself, the stirrups rattling. Eldridge tied the reins. He walked up the steps. The porch was deep, shaded by the overhang of the roof. A table had been set up near the railing to catch the evening breeze. It was covered in a white linen cloth. A silver candelabra held 3 burning tapers, the flames standing straight in the still air. Colonel Vance was eating dinner. He was cutting a steak, a thick, rare porterhouse that bled onto the china plate. He used a silver knife and fork, his movements precise, elegant. He raised a piece of meat to his mouth, chewed and swallowed. He took a sip of red wine from a crystal goblet. He looked content. He looked like a man who had won the war and was enjoying the spoils. Eldridge stopped at the edge of the light. The floorboards didn't creak. He was wearing Hatcher's boots now, but he still walked like he was barefoot, testing the wood. Vance sensed him. He didn't look up immediately. He cut another piece of steak. "You're late, Hatcher," Vance said. "I expected you an hour ago. Did you bring the ears?" "I brought something," Eldridge said. Vance froze. The fork stopped halfway to his mouth. It wasn't Hatcher's voice. It was a rasp. A sound like a shovel hitting gravel. Vance lowered the fork. He turned his head. He looked at the figure standing by the rail. He saw the red mud. He saw the cracks in the mask where the white skin showed through. He saw the eyes. Blue ice. Vance didn't panic. He was a colonel. He had seen things in the war that would break a lesser man. But he went still. "You," Vance said. "Me?" Eldridge said. "You're supposed to be dead. Hatcher said you were barefoot. In the desert." Hatcher was optimistic. Vance looked past Eldridge toward the yard. "Where is he? Where is my patrol?" "They resigned," Eldridge said. He walked to the table. He stood opposite Vance. The candles flickered, casting long dancing shadows on the white suit. Vance looked at the Springfield in Eldridge's hand. He looked at the Colt in his belt. "You killed them," Vance said. It wasn't a question. It was an appraisal. 10 men. And a tracker. "I cleaned the range," Eldridge said. "Isn't that what you pay for?" "Clearing out the vermin." Vance set his knife down. It clicked against the plate. "You're a resourceful man, Mr. Sample. I misjudged you." "You judged me fine. You just bet on the wrong horse. And now you're here." Vance picked up his wine glass. His hand was steady. "What do you want?" "You want to kill me." "Here. On my porch. My men are in the bunkhouse. 1 shot, and they'll cut you to pieces." "Maybe," Eldridge said. "But you'll be the first piece on the floor." Vance took a sip of wine. "So it's money. It's always money. You want the rest of the payment? The gold I promised Hatcher?" "I saw the gold," Eldridge said. "It looked heavy." "It is. $5,000. In the safe. Inside." Vance gestured with his glass toward the front door. "It's yours. Take it. Ride out. You're a free man. Rich. I'm not here for the payroll." "Then what?" "Justice?" Vance scoffed. "There's no justice out here, Sample. There's just land. And men strong enough to hold it." "There are children," Eldridge said. Vance frowned. "What?" "The homestead," Eldridge said. 10 miles west. The Saudi. The family you paid Chateau to erase." "I don't pay for specifics," Vance said coldly. "I pay for results. Collateral damage is unfortunate but necessary." 2 kids, Eldridge said. "A boy and a girl. They weren't collateral. They were taken. Comanches take slaves. It's their way." "It's your way," Eldridge said. "You bought the ticket. You own the ride." Eldridge reached into his pocket. His hand came out holding something dark and wet. He threw it on the table. It landed on the white linen tablecloth with a heavy, wet splat. It slid a few inches, leaving a streak of red slime, and came to rest next to the crystal goblet. It was a pair of shoulder straps. Captain's bars. Wool backing, gold stitching. They were soaked in blood. Vance stared at them. He looked at the blood, spreading into the weave of the linen. He looked at the gold thread, tarnished with gore. "Hatcher," Vance whispered. "He wanted you to have them," Eldridge said. "He was wearing them when he died." Crawling in the dirt. Vance looked up. The arrogance cracked. For the first time, the colonel looked at the mud-caked man and saw something he couldn't buy and couldn't order around. "You're insane," Vance said. "I'm awake," Eldridge said. He stepped back. He raised the muzzle of the Springfield. "That steak looks cold, Colonel," Eldridge said. Vance pushed his chair back. The legs screeched on the wood. "You can't do this," Vance said. His voice rose. "I am a colonel. I own this valley. I am the law." "You're a cattle thief," Eldridge said. "And a murderer. And tonight, you're just another bandit in a red shirt." Vance looked at the bunkhouse. He opened his mouth to scream for help. Eldridge racked the hammer of the carbine. The click was louder than the shout would have been. "Don't," Eldridge said. "Finish your dinner." Vance slumped back in his chair. He looked at the bloody insignia. He looked at the gun. "What happens now?" Vance asked. "Now," Eldridge said, "we talk about the price of beef." Chapter 25. The steak on the china plate was cooling. The blood from the meat mixing with the blood from the shoulder straps Eldridge Sample had thrown onto the linen. Colonel Vance looked at it. He picked up his napkin, heavy damask, white as a cloud, and dabbed his lips. He didn't look terrified. He looked annoyed, like a man who had found a fly in his soup. "The price of beef," Vance said. He set the napkin down. "It fluctuates. Market forces. Drought. Supply and demand. And murder," Eldridge said. "Overhead," Vance corrected. He leaned back in his wicker chair, the wood creaking. "You think you're the first man to come onto my porch with a gun and a grievance? I built this ranch on grievances. I bought this land from the Mexicans with lead, and I held it against the Comanches with iron. Now I hold it against the world with gold." "Hatcher thought the gold would save him," Eldridge said. "He died in the dirt." "Hatcher was an employee," Vance said dismissively. "Employees are replaceable. But vision is rare." Vance reached into his inside coat pocket. Eldridge leveled the Springfield carbine. "Careful." Vance moved slowly. He pulled out a key on a gold chain. He laid it on the table, next to the bloody insignia. "The safe is in the study," Vance said. "Behind the portrait of my father. $5,000, Mr. Sample. In double eagles. It weighs about 17 pounds. You can carry it. You have a horse. I don't want your money." "Everyone wants money," Vance said. "It's the only thing that's real. Justice. That's a story we tell children, so they sleep at night. Honor. That's what they write on tombstones to make the widows feel better. But gold buys the land. It buys the law. It buys the silence." Vance picked up his wine glass. He swirled the red liquid. "Think about it," Vance said. "You kill me, what happens? My men come out of the bunkhouse. They cut you down. You die here on my porch for nothing. A drifter who got greedy. Or," Eldridge said, "I kill you and they realize the peril just stopped." Vance paused. He looked at the bunkhouse lights. He looked back at Eldridge. "They're loyal," Vance said. "They're hired," Eldridge said. "There's a difference." Vance's eyes hardened. The veneer of the Southern gentleman slipped, revealing the ruthless cattle baron underneath. "You're making a mistake," Vance said. "A fatal one. I am the law in this county. I appoint the sheriff. I dine with the judge. You shoot me, you hang. There is no version of this story where you ride away." "I'm not looking for a way out," Eldridge said. "I'm looking for a balance." "Balance?" Vance scoffed. "Because of a sodbuster, a squatter who put up a fence on my range." "Because of the children," Eldridge said. "They're gone," Vance said. "Comanches took them. They're halfway to the Llano by now. They'll be sold in Mexico or raised as slaves. It's ugly, but it's the way of the world. You can't change it." "I can change the man who paid for the ticket." Vance slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. "I paid for order," Vance shouted. "I paid to civilize this territory. You think a few homesteaders matter? I feed cities. I bring the railroad. I am the future." "You're a butcher," Eldridge said. "I am a necessary evil." Vance stood up. He was big, imposing in his white suit. He glared at Eldridge. "And you are nothing. A relic. A man with a stolen gun and dirt on his face." Vance reached for the bell on the table. A small silver bell used to summon servants. "I'm calling my men," Vance said. "Put the gun down, Sample. Take the money. Or die. Those are your choices." Eldridge looked at the man. He looked at the arrogance that shielded him like armor. Vance truly believed he was untouchable because he wrote the checks. Eldridge racked the hammer of the Springfield. "I didn't come for the money," Eldridge said. "I've killed men for money. I've killed men for the law. I've killed men because they were trying to kill me." He raised the rifle to his shoulder. "But I can't stomach the killing of innocents," Eldridge said. Vance's eyes went wide. He saw it then. He saw the thing that gold couldn't buy. He rang the bell. Ting-a-ling. It was a small, delicate sound. Eldridge squeezed the trigger. Boom. The shot was deafening on the enclosed porch. The .45 to 70 slug hit Vance in the chest, right through the lapel of his white linen coat. Vance was thrown backward. He hit the wall of the house, knocking a picture frame askew. He slid down, his legs splayed. The white suit turned red. He looked at Eldridge, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a bank, but no words came out. Just blood. The bell rolled across the floorboards, ringing softly until it hit the rail. Shouts erupted from the bunkhouse. What was that? Gunshot. At the main house. Doors banged open. Boots crunched on gravel. Eldridge didn't run. He grabbed the candelabra from the table. The 3 tapers were still burning. He threw it. He tossed it through the open front door into the hallway. It landed on a rug. The dry wool caught instantly. The flames licked up, grabbing the velvet curtains, climbing the varnished wainscoting. The house was a tinderbox of seasoned wood and expensive fabric. It wanted to burn. Eldridge grabbed the tablecloth. He yanked it. The china, the crystal, the steak, and the bloody insignia crashed to the floor. He kicked the table over, blocking the door. "Fire!" a cowboy yelled from the yard. "The house is on fire." Eldridge vaulted the railing. He landed in the flower bed, crushing the hydrangeas. He ran to Hatcher's horse. He untied the reins. He swung into the saddle. The cowboys were running toward the house, bucket brigades forming, confusion reigning. They saw the fire. They saw the colonel down on the porch. "Get water." "Where's the colonel?" "He's hit. Someone shot the colonel." Eldridge turned the bay horse. He rode into the light of the burning house. A cowboy saw him. "Hey, who's that?" Eldridge leveled the Springfield one-handed. He fired a shot into the air. "He's dead," Eldridge yelled. "The payroll is gone. Burn it down." The cowboys hesitated. They looked at the dead man on the porch. They looked at the flames consuming the roof. They looked at the stranger on the cavalry horse. They didn't shoot. They were hired hands. They fought for wages. With Vance dead, the wages stopped. "Let it burn," one of the older hands said, dropping his bucket. "I never liked him anyway." Eldridge spurred the horse. He rode out of the yard. He rode under the double V arch. He looked back once. The ranch house was a torch. Flames shot 20 feet into the air, lighting up the valley. The roof collapsed with a roar of sparks. The empire of grass and beef was ending in smoke. Eldridge turned west. He didn't have his badge. He didn't have a name. He was just a man covered in dried mud, riding a stolen horse. But he had a direction. The tracks of the war party were still there, cutting through the dark, heading for the Caprock. Heading for the place where they held the children. Eldridge Sample settled his hat. He checked the load in the carbine. "I'm coming," he whispered to the wind. He kicked the horse into a gallop, riding away from the fire and into the deep cold night of the high plains. The war wasn't over. It had just moved west. The end.